Into the Darkness, Chapter 1. Toa Motoro swam silently through the black waters of the pit. Behind him, the robot guardian named Maxilos followed. To Motoro, it felt like having the shadow of doom hanging over him, for he knew what no one else did, that the mechanical body of Maxilos was possessed by the spirit of the evil Makuta. "Why so quiet?" asked Makuta in the hollow voice of Maxilos. "We have seen death and destruction today, with the promise of much more to come. We have seen heroes behaving like villains. You yourself have done things even I would be reluctant to do. It is a time for celebration." "Shut up," said Motoro. "I'm doing only what I have to do to save the life of Motonui, a life you put in jeopardy." Makuta laughed. "Think what you like, little Toa, and try to avoid admitting to yourself that you are one bad day, one moment of cruelty, one fit of rage away from being me." Makuta swam past Motoro and then veered down toward the sea bottom. "Come with me. I want to show you something." "What?" asked Motoro. "Call it an answer to some of your questions," replied Makuta. He led Motoro down at the depths of the black water. There they came to a great gap in the sea floor. "I discovered this shortly after taking over the body of Maxilos. It's an entrance to the original pit, the prison once inhabited by the Baraki and others like them. There is something down there I think you should see." "How do I know this isn't a trap?" asked Motoro. "You don't," answered Makuta. "But surely a strong and brave Toa like yourself fears nothing. Follow me." Makuta swam down through the opening. Motoro watched him go until the crimson form had disappeared into the pit. The Toa of Ice checked his Kordak blaster, readied himself for anything that might happen, and followed his greatest enemy into the darkness. To be continued. Into the Darkness, Chapter 2. Makuta led Toamari Motoro deep into the dark recesses of the former prison known as the Pit. It was eerily quiet. Now and then a sea creature darted past, keeping its distance from two beings it no doubt regarded as predators. "Certainly one of us is," thought Motoro. "Makuta has been preying on the fears of Matoran for as long as I can remember. And I, what have I become? As soon as I realized I wore a mask that let me reanimate the dead, I should have cast it aside. I never should have used it." "When you are through brooding, I have found what I was seeking," said Makuta. "Here." Motoro looked where he was pointing. Half buried in rubble was a Kanohi mask of power, one whose shape seemed vaguely familiar. Scattered nearby was blue Toa armor. "What is this?" said Motoro. "All that remains of a Toa of water named Tuyet," Makuta replied. "She was condemned here many thousands of years ago. She died here, though I don't know why. Perhaps she was trying to escape." "Why was she sent here?" "It is hard for me to give exact reasons, since I did not even know here existed until a few days ago. But I do know her crime. She tampered with an object of power that did not belong in her hands. It was too much for her. She went wild, was defeated by Toa Likan and Toa Nadiki, and the object was destroyed, or so the heroes thought." "Get to the point," said Motoro. Makuta laughed. "I would have thought it would be obvious. Tuyet is dead. She is also the only one who might know how that powerful artifact, the Nui Stone, could be recreated. I want you to use your mask, Motoro, the mask of reanimation. I want you to bring her back." To be continued. Into the Darkness, Chapter 3. Toamari Motoro and Makuta stood over the battered mask and armor of the long-dead Toa Tuyet. "You are insane," said Motoro. "I won't do what you ask." "I must have missed the part where I gave you a choice," Makuta replied. "I want you to use your mask power to reanimate this corpse, and I want you to do it now." After a moment, he added, "I could just kill you, Motoro, take the mask, and do the job myself, but it's so much more amusing this way." "Even if I bring her back, she won't be able to help you recreate the Nui Stone," insisted Motoro. "She'll have no spirit. She'll have no mind." "I have always found the minds of Toa to be vastly overrated anyway," said Makuta. "Now get to work." Motoro concentrated, triggering the power of his mask of reanimation. He knew Makuta meant what he said. He would kill Motoro without a second thought. Beyond that, the Toa of Ice was curious to find out just what it was Makuta was up to here. Once he knew that, he could always send Tuyet back to the grave by cutting off the power of the mask. At his feet, the Kanohi mask and armor began to move, slowly coming together. What had been a pile of junk a moment before now had taken on a form. Other pieces of armor were rising up through the layers of mud, struggling to rejoin the rest. It somehow managed to be amazing and sickening at the same time. Slowly, the body that once belonged to Toa Tuyet rose from the floor of the pit and stood unsteadily, waiting for commands. And that was when Motoro noticed something. Incredibly tiny, almost microscopic pieces of crystal embedded in the dead Toa's armor. "Behold," said Makuta, "when the Nui stone exploded so many thousands of years ago, most of it vaporized, but some fragments survived, buried in Tuyet's armor. With these I can recreate the stone as it once was. All I need is the proper tool." "What tool?" asked Motoro. "The Staff of Artaka," answered Makuta, "and unless I am mistaken, your old friends the Toa Nuva are about to get it for me." To be continued. Into the Darkness, Chapter 4. Toa Motoro, Makuta in the body of the robot Maxilos, and the reanimated Toa Tuyet swam away from the long-abandoned prison and into the open ocean. Motoro's mind raced. What had Makuta planned to do with the Nui stone if he recreated it? What was the Staff of Artaka, and why did Makuta believe the Toa Nuva would help him get it? More importantly, how could Motoro stop this?
Motoro!
The Toa of Ice turned. Toa Holly was swimming toward him. In the background, Motoro could see what looked like an ocean full of manta rays.
"Where are you going? And who is that Toa with you? She looks, Motoro, what have you done?"
Motoro could hear Makuta's voice in his mind. "We have a meeting to attend, or have you forgotten? One of my brotherhood waits near Mari Nui, but he will not wait long. You wouldn't want to make us late, would you? And Motoro, breathe a word to Holly, and neither of you will live to see another tide. Holly, don't worry. Everything's fine. Just trust me."
"I do trust you, but I think you have become a little too used to keeping secrets, brother, and I'm starting to wonder if you trust me or any of us."
Motoro looked Holly right in the eyes. "It will all work out. Everything is going just as planned. As smooth as that time Nuperu used his mask of flight to transport you over the chasm. Remember? Now we have to go." The three figures swam off, leaving Holly disturbed and not a little angry. Then a memory suddenly came to her.
"Wait a minute. When I flew with Nuperu, he dropped me. I almost got killed. Motoro was trying to send me a message. He's in trouble, and I wish I knew how to get him out."
To be continued. Into the Darkness, Part 5. Important. Be sure to read Dreams of Destruction, Part 6, before listening to this biocast. Motoro felt like he was in the middle of a nightmare, and he dearly wished he could wake up. On his journey with Makuta and the reanimated Toa Tuyet, they had been attacked by Karzani, the mad ruler of a realm of misery for Matoran. Karzani sought the Staff of Artaka they carried, but Makuta was not about to give that up without a fight. When the battle began to go against him, Karzani summoned a horde of Manus crabs to his aid. Manus. The word meant monster in Matoran, for that's what they were. The Toa of Ice's heart froze as the Manus moved in. He hurled his ice power at them, but they shrugged it off. Once it had taken 6 Toa to stop only a pair of Manus, and now he and Makuta faced hundreds. Strangely, the Master of Shadows did nothing. He didn't hurl shadow bolts or chain lightning. He just waited and watched until the crabs were well within striking distance. Then he reached out with his mind, his most powerful weapon. Using his power to control beasts of land, sea, and air, he seized control of half the Manus and turned them against the others. It was a horrible sight, as the huge Savas Manus toward each other. Karzani looked on in shock as his army disintegrated before his eyes. Motoro looked away. Makuta simply laughed. "Pets," said the Master of Shadows. "They do make such a mess. Perhaps, Karzani, I should set the survivors on you." Now it was Karzani's turn to smile. He had powers of his own, powers Makuta could not hope to cope with, he was sure. Triggering his ability, he thrust a vision into Makuta's mind. Now Makuta saw, as surely as if it were really happening, the future day when the Toa Nuva would awaken the great spirit Mana Nui. He saw Motunui rise, whole for the first time in 1,000 years. And then he saw the Great Spirit's power surge through the universe, seeking out those who would dare to rebel against him. He saw the terrible vengeance of Motunui, and knew the final punishment that waited for him. And Makuta screamed. To be continued in Dreams of Destruction, Part 7. Into the Darkness, Chapter 6. If Makuta was at all rattled by his fierce battle with Karzani, he didn't show it. Nor had he displayed any particular emotion when he and Mitoro had met with Makuta Icarax, who had brought the staff of Artaka to the waters above the pit. He had simply taken the object from his fellow Brotherhood member and dismissed Icarax with a nod. Now he and Mitoro stood over the shattered remains of Toa Tuyet's armor. A single fragment of the Nui stone gleamed in the darkness. "That is all the staff needs," said Makuta quietly. "One piece, and its power will recreate the stone as it once was." "And what good will that do you?" asked Mitoro. "What do you plan to do with it?" "Very well, my curious little Toa," Makuta replied. "Think on this. Tuyet and later Nadiki were not the only Toa to ever turn bad. And if the next one should happen to fall under my sway, well, what better than to use the Nui stone to increase his power 100-fold, 1,000-fold? Imagine an all-powerful Toa at my command wiping your kind from the face of this planet." Makuta aimed the staff of Artaka at the Nui stone fragment and triggered its power. Slowly the pieces of the stone began to float through the water, drifting toward each other, joining together for the first time in 1,000 years. "I can't let you do this," yelled Mitoro, charging forward. Makuta waved his hand, and a stasis field froze the Toa of ice. "And I can't let you stop me," said Makuta. "No one can stop me now." A blast of sheer raw power struck the Master of Shadows squarely in the back. Makuta staggered, dropping the staff. "Who dares?" he snarled. "In my time, I've dared lots of things. Maybe too many things," came the reply. "I fell a long way from the light, and I can never find my way back." Makuta whirled. Hovering in the water was Brutaka, former guardian of the Mask of Life, now mutated prisoner of the pit. Wisps of energy were still drifting from his open hand. His body had changed, twisted spikes now jutting out of his armor and what looked like a long dorsal fin running down his back. Brutaka stood, ready for battle. But the darkness is not so complete that I can't recognize a monster when I see one. Makuta hurled a blast of shadow energy at Brutaka. The warrior sidestepped and dove past Makuta, snatching up the staff of Artaka even as he shouted, "Botar!" Events happened quickly then. The Order of Motunui agent known as Botar appeared suddenly in the midst of battle, taking the staff from Brutaka. He spared a moment for a nod of thanks to his former teammate before vanishing once more. "It's gone," Brutaka said to Makuta. "The staff is gone where you cannot reach it. You've lost." "If I have lost the staff, you are about to lose everything," said Makuta. Brutaka did not tremble at the threat or back away. Instead, he just laughed, a long, hard laugh with a little trace of madness in it. "You seem to have me mistaken," he said, "for someone who has anything at all left to lose." To be continued. Into the Darkness, Chapter 7. "Get out of here, now," Brutaka shouted to Mitoro. "Get back to the other Toa. I'll handle Makuta." "As you handled the Toa Nuva and the Toa Anika," sneered Makuta. "Are you fool enough to think you can trust him, Mitoro?" Toa Mitoro weighed his choice. Brutaka had once been a member of the Order of Motunui before he had turned bad, but Makuta? His spirit had been black from the day he had been created. There was no choice at all. He swam away as fast as he could, heading for a rendezvous with his teammates. "You cost me the Nui stone," growled Makuta, hurling a burst of shadow energy at Brutaka. "You have become an annoyance." But the shadow bolt never reached its target. Triggering the power of his Kanohi mask, Brutaka opened a dimensional portal and shunted the energy into the zone of darkness where it could harm nothing. "Then let's see if I can move up to an irritation," said Brutaka, firing his own blast of energy from his sword. The blast knocked Makuta's weapon from his hand. "You know, Makuta, we could do this all day, but it won't get you what you want." "And that is?" asked Makuta, even as he used his control over gravity to slam Brutaka into a nearby mountain. "Ow," said Brutaka. "Well, you don't want the Mask of Life. If you did, you would never have hired those bumbling Paraka to get it for you. But you do want to be there when it's found, pulling everyone's strings. You want to decide who has it, how they use it, and when. Am I getting warm?" "A little too warm for comfort," answered Makuta, throwing a stasis field around Brutaka. But the former Order of Motunui member demolished the field with one swipe of his blade. "Please," said Brutaka, "I was getting out of stasis fields when you're still on Destral raising archives moles." "What is it you want, Brutaka?" "Once I would have said I wanted the mask myself," Brutaka replied. "Once I would have seen myself ruling a universe with it. Now I guess you could say my vision's improved, and I just want to see you sweat." Brutaka smiled. "Oh, and by the way, Nocturne had the mask last I saw, but Hydraxon was about to take it away from him, and who knows what that lunatic will do with it, so maybe you better go see." Makuta's instinct was to continue the battle, but Brutaka was right. He couldn't afford to lose control of events, not at this late stage. "This isn't over," warned the Master of Shadows. Brutaka ran a finger along the razor-sharp edge of his sword. "Oh, Makuta, I'm counting on that." To be continued. Into the Darkness, Chapter 8. Makuta, in the body of Maxilos, swam rapidly through the dark waters of the pit. As he did so, his mind drifted back to the past and the journey that had brought him to this place and time. Had it really only been some 100,000 years ago that he first saw the light of day, along with his fellow Makuta? Kirox, Antraz, Vampra, Mutran, and the others, they had been selected by the Great Spirit Motunui for a special purpose. It would be their job to bring into being the plants and animals needed to keep the universe running smoothly. Over time, their role expanded. The Brotherhood of Makuta became responsible for watching over the lands and seas of the Matoran universe. Internal threats to the power of Motunui were crushed by armies led by Makuta. While the Great Spirit focused on matters of cosmic importance, the day-to-day safety and security of the world fell on the shoulders of the Makuta. Oh, there were Toa, of course, blundering about and noisily dealing with what they laughingly referred to as menaces, but the true power to create and destroy rested with the Brotherhood. Logic dictated that the Matoran would come to realize how much their puny lives depended on the Makuta and would behave accordingly. But no, when they held their naming day festivals, they did it in honor of Motunui. When they finished a day's work, they thanked Motunui for the successful completion of their labors. Motunui, who was so far above them they might as well have been fireflies scurrying about his feet. So many millennia being passed over led to jealousy, and jealousy to resentment, and resentment to hatred, until just beneath the surface of every Makuta burned a desire to see the Great Spirit humbled. But it was not until the failed rebellion of the Baraki that the Makuta of Motunui began to think maybe, just maybe, something could be done. But his plan extended beyond just Motunui's defeat. No, it was a labyrinthian scheme, a plot that drew into its web multiple teams of Toa, Dark Hunters, Borak, Viserak, and more. And yet, despite all its twists and turns, the plan was also breathtaking in its simplicity. "There is a small Rahi called a water wraith," he explained to the rest of the Brotherhood some 80,000 years ago. "So small, so insignificant is it that larger fish do not even consider it a worthy meal. But every now and then a bold water wraith will attack a creature much larger and more powerful than it. It is a one-sided battle, of course, that ends with the poor water wraith in the mouth of its foe. Of course, what the larger fish quickly discovers is that the outer shell of a water wraith is coated with deadly poison. The larger fish dies instantly, and the water wraith escapes to feast for months on its very foolish and very dead opponent. Sometimes, my brothers," he had said, seating himself on his obsidian throne, "the best way, the only way to win, is by losing." To be continued. Into the Darkness, Chapter 9. Makuta was cold, colder than he had ever been, colder even than the darkness he inhabited. On his way to prevent Hydraxon from acquiring the Mask of Life, he had been ambushed by Toa Matoro and frozen inside super-hard ice. Now even his energy was beginning to crystallize, not at all good from his point of view. Through the clear ice, he could dimly make out the forms of the Toamari, Baraki, and Hydraxon in a mad scramble for the artifact. None of them, he was sure, had the slightest idea what the mask could really do. To them, it was just a bright, golden treasure to be warred over like hungry Rahi after a meal. Makuta, of course, knew better. He had pieced together half-remembered legends, whispered rumors, even fragments of information retrieved in the long-past raid on the island of Artaka. The Mask of Life was intended as more than just a cure-all for the Great Spirit Motunui in the event of his illness. No, the Mask of Life was a quick solution to another problem altogether. The great beings had created a universe, but they could not be certain it would operate as they wished. And if it did not, if the population plunged into war, if pestilence and famine took hold, if all hope was gone, the mask would activate, draining all life from every being and ending the universe once and for all time. When the time came, the mask would first turn from gold to silver, and eventually to black when the end time had arrived. Axon, Brutaka, Umbra, all the noble guardians of the Kanohi Ignika had never realized that they were protecting an item that could bring about complete annihilation. But Makuta knew its true importance and had factored that into his great plan. Of course, death by freezing had not been a part of the scheme. That was when Makuta noticed something quite wonderful. A lone drop of water was falling down the outside of his icy prison. Then he saw why. Jala had created a wall of flame. The heat was melting Matoro's ice, and freedom was moments away. The powerful limb of Maxilos shattered the prison, and Makuta guided his new body into the battle. It was time to move the plan one step closer to completion. The end. For now. Dark Mirror, Chapter 1. Plunging through the void between dimensions, Takanuva, Toa of Light, could hardly believe what had happened to him in the last day. While patrolling the shores of Metronui, he had been attacked by a creature he later learned was a shadow leech, and barely survived. When he awoke, he discovered that his light had been partially drained, leaving him with the ability to fire light from his left hand and shadow from his right. His rescuers turned out to be members of a secret organization called the Order of Motunui, who tasked him with a vital mission. He was to bring important information to the Toa Nuva and Cardanui, and if he failed, the 6 Toa were surely doomed. The fastest way to get him there was using the power of a mask of dimensional gates worn by reformed member Brutaka, but the mask was ever so slightly damaged, and the ride had already been a rough one. A circle of light opened ahead of him. He plunged through it, hoping he had reached Cardanui in time. Instead, he landed flat on his mask in the familiar surroundings of the city of Metronui. Or was it familiar? The city was intact and beautiful as it had been when he left, but something was odd. There were statues of Toa everywhere, Tahu, Gali, and the others, but not in their Nuva forms, as they had been before they transformed. There were other statues, too, of Toa Takanuva did not recognize, and looming over them all was a massive sculpture of a Kanohi mask, the Mask of Intangibility. How long have I been gone, wondered Takanuva, and who decided to redecorate? He spotted a Matoran he knew well, Kapura, scurrying quickly through the street. Takanuva stepped in front of him and said, "Wait, friend. I don't think I've ever seen you run before. What's the hurry?" Kapura looked up at him. There was shock and fear in the Matoran's eyes, but no recognition. "Forgive me, Great Toa," he said so fast the words tumbled over themselves. "Was I not running fast enough? I promise I will try to do better." "Kapura, it's me. It's Takanuva. What's come over you?" Nothing, insisted Kapura. "All is well, Great Toa, for how could it be anything else with such wise and benevolent leaders?" "All right, I've had about enough of this," said Takanuva. "Where's Taragavakama? Where are the Toamari?" "I don't know who you're talking about," insisted Kapura. "Let me pass, please, before—" The temperature suddenly dropped all around. The next moment, Kapura was locked in a foot-thick shell of ice from his neck down. The Matoran cried out from the intense cold. Takanuva looked up, only to see Tahu and Kopaka standing nearby, frost still drifting from the sword of the Toa of Ice. "Tahu, Kopaka, thank the great beings you're here," said Takanuva. "Something's wrong with Kapura, maybe with the entire city." "The only thing wrong here, stranger, is you," said Tahu. "Who are you? Why are you here? Where is your identity tablet?" I'm Takanuva. I live here. You know me, and I don't know what an identity tablet is." Kopaka raised his sword and unleashed a hail of ice at the shocked Takanuva, knocking the Toa of Light to the ground. Standing over him, Kopaka held the point of his sword to Takanuva's neck. "Well, Takanuva, if that is your name, you are now a prisoner of the Toa Empire, against which you have committed an act of war." To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 2. Tahu and Kopaka dragged a protesting Takanuva to the Colosseum. Vaki guardians saluted and stepped aside to let the Toa enter. Wordlessly, they hauled Takanuva through winding corridors, finally tossing him into a cold, dark cell. "Make yourself comfortable," said Tahu. "Someone will be back for you, and Toa Tuyet is ready to question you in a day or a week." "If this is some kind of joke, it isn't funny anymore," said Takanuva. "What is going on around here?" But Tahu and Kopaka had already walked away. "What's going on, stranger, is that you came to the wrong place at the wrong time," said a weak voice behind Takanuva. The Toa turned, surprised to find he was not alone. Hanging on the wall from chains around his wrists and ankles was a Matoran. Using the merest fraction of his light power, Takanuva illuminated the cell. He stumbled back against the cell door in shock. The imprisoned Matoran was none other than Takua, a fact that seemed impossible since Takanuva had been Takua before becoming a Toa. "This is insane," said Takanuva. "You're me. I'm you. How—" "I see," said Takua. "You're not one of the smarter ones. You wouldn't happen to know how to pick a lock, would you?" Takanuva shook his head. If this was a dream or an illusion, it was a whopper. But just in case it wasn't, he fired a thin beam of laser light from his left hand and sliced through Takua's chains. A quick move let him catch the Matoran before he fell to the stone floor. "That's a neat trick," said Takua. "So what are you in for?" I don't know," said Takanuva. "I'm not even sure where I am." "Metronui, City of Legend," said Takua. Of course, these days all the legends end with, and the Toa crushed anyone who got in their way, or in my case spent more time wandering than working. When the Vaki treatment didn't take, they put me here. "I can't believe this," said Takanuva. "Tahu and Kopaka insane or worse, Matoran jailed, and me sitting here talking to myself. Listen, where's Gali?" "In Gametru, of course," the Matoran replied. "She and Karzani run the re-education center." "Listen, Takanuva paused, unable to bring himself to say the name Takua. "What happened here? How did things get so crazy?" "It was about 3,500 years ago now," said Takua. "Toa Tuyet tapped into the power of something called the Nui Stone, which gave her the power of maybe 100 Toa. When Toa Likan tried to stop her, he got killed by her and his traitorous friend, Toa Nadiki. And that's it. Tuyet took over Metronui and convinced the other Toa it was their destiny to smash anyone who posed a threat to the Great Spirit. That meant everyone from the Makuta to the Dark Hunters, to Toa who didn't seem enthusiastic enough, and Matoran who didn't work quite hard enough." Takanuva suddenly reached up and took off his mask of power. Before Takua could protest, he had placed it on top of the Matoran's mask. Nothing happened. Takua tore the mask of light off, saying, "What are you trying to do, smother me?" "Just testing a theory," said Takanuva, rising and putting his mask back on. "Come on, we're getting out of here." "And go where?" asked Takua. "We have a date in the archives," the Toa of Light answered, "or rather, below them. And here's hoping Vakuma's stories about what's down there, who's down there, were all true." To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 3. "Where are we going?" asked Takua. "How did you take out those Vaki guards so fast? What's down here? Have you been down here before?" "Would you be quiet?" Takanuva snapped. He had never realized before just how annoying he was as a Matoran. "There's no telling who or what is down here, and I'd rather not have unexpected company." In truth, it was more than Takua's chattering that was bothering Takanuva. In his universe, the Metronui archives were filled with exhibits of Rahi beasts, carvings, tools, and other things that Ano-Matoran and Co-Matoran scholars might study. But in this strange world that he had stumbled upon, the archives was more like a museum of conquest. A long-dead and mounted Visorak stared from the shadows with glassy eyes. A collection of weaponry was nearby, each item identified with a small inscribed tablet. The staff of the Shadowed One, the Spear of Fusion, Zamor Sphere launchers, Rotuka launchers, and more. Next to that was the most amazing sight of all, the Kanohi Mask of Shadows, once the property of the leader of the Brotherhood of Makuta, now nailed to the wall like just another trophy. Moving further into the depths of the archives, the Toa and Matoran came upon a group of stasis tubes. These were used to keep Rahi in suspended animation so they could be studied. At least that was what they had been used for in Takanuva's universe. In this dimension, he saw with shock that they served a quite different purpose. One tube stood apart from the others, the glow of a lightstone playing on its face. Takanuva wiped the dust away from the crystal and gasped. Inside, trapped in stasis, was Taragaduma, ruler of Metronui. "I can't believe this," Takanuva said. Even Toa, as mad as they are here, would never do this. Duma talked too much, said Takua sadly, and coming from me, that's saying something. When Toa Tuyet took over, he stood up and said that true Toa valued justice and mercy, and she had neither in her heart. He had to admire him for it, all the way up to the moment that they hauled him off and stuck him in there. Takanuva fired a beam of laser light from his left hand, slicing open the crystal case. Takua grabbed his arm, trying to pull it away. "Are you crazy? What if there are alarms? You can't do that." "I just did," said Takanuva, catching the falling Duma. Consciousness slowly returned to the Turaga. When he saw Takanuva, he said, "Who are you?" "I'm a friend," Takanuva replied. "You? A Toa?" "No Toa is my friend," said Duma. "I don't have time to argue with you," said Takanuva. "Somewhere down here there is an intelligent Rahi called a Kraka. At least I hope she's here. We need to find her. Something is very, very wrong in this world, and I'm going to need help if I am going to make things right."
"Help is exactly what you need, Toa,"
said a voice behind Takanuva. He whirled to see the one figure he never expected. Takua and Duma both backed away in fear. Standing before them was the leader of the Toa Empire, the wielder of the Nui Stone, and the unquestioned ruler of the known universe, Toa Tuyet. To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 4. Takanuva, Takua, and Turaga Duma walked in single file through the depths of the archives, followed by the silent Toa Tuyet. The ruler of the Toa Empire had not spoken a word since capturing the three of them, simply gestured with her barbed broadsword for them to get moving. They marched for what seemed like hours, through twists and turns, past long-forgotten exhibits, and into regions that probably even the archive caretakers didn't know existed. Takanuva was puzzled. Tuyet could have just brought them back to a cell on the surface, or for that matter, killed them. Why go on a tour of the archives? Things got even more disturbing and bizarre as they rounded a corner and entered a large chamber. In the back were a half-dozen badly damaged Rakshi and an Exo-Toa armored suit missing its right arm. Even more surprising was the sight of two figures clad in black armor who sprang to their feet at the sight of the newcomers, shadow energy crackling in their hands. Takanuva turned around, but Tuyet was no longer there. Standing in her place was another Makuta, this one wearing a scarred and pitted Kanohi Hau. When he spoke, it was in the familiar grating voice of the Makuta of Metronui. "A simple strategy," he said. "Tuyet has left us little choice but to use our shape-shifting powers when we venture out. Even then we risk capture, just as we have captured you." "I don't understand," said Takanuva. "Why aren't you wearing the Mask of Shadows? I saw it hanging in the archives." Makuta gave Takanuva a look that would have chilled the snow atop Mount Ihu. "The mask is warded. If it is so much as touched, Tuyet and her minions will know at once. She keeps it there unguarded as a taunt to me, knowing I long for it and cannot touch it." The two other Makuta and those Rakshi that could still move closed in. "But you are not so protected, Toa. Give me one good reason why we should not kill you now as your kind has killed ours for so many centuries." "I'm not—" Takanuva began, then stopped as he debated how much to tell his captors. These were, after all, Makuta, the most evil beings in the universe from which he came. Here, though, they were hunted fugitives in a world gone mad. "I'm not one of Tuyet's Toa. My name is Takanuva. I am a Toa of Light." The three Makuta recoiled. Takanuva could understand why. A Toa of Light was the ultimate weapon against beings of shadow. "Listen to me," he continued. "I come from someplace else, where there is no Tuyet, no Toa Empire. I can't claim I understand what happened here, but I do know this. I don't belong here, and I need to get back to my own universe." The three Makuta were silent for a moment. Then they began to laugh, a horrible sound that echoed throughout the chamber for long minutes. "And just how," said the Makuta of Metronui, "do you propose to get back to this universe of yours, my poor mad Toa?" "By finding the one who sent me on my journey," Takanuva replied, "a being named Brutaka." One of the Makuta nodded. He was tall, with armor lined with short, curved, and very sharp blades. "I have heard legends of a Brutaka. It's said he is a great hero who guards a valuable treasure. But in Matoran legend, every pile of rocks is a treasure, every Rahi larger than a stone rat is a monster, and anyone who doesn't scream and run when the thunder cracks is a hero of great courage." "Very true, Krika, very true indeed," said the Makuta of Metronui. Very well, then. You, Toa, are either a liar, or fool, or a madman, I know not which. But if you need our help, you will have to pay a price. And what is that price? Asked Takanuva. A Matoran expedition escorted by a pair of Toa left Metronui weeks ago, bound for the island of Artaka, said Makuta. They were to retrieve an object of power, a legendary mask of time, one of the few weapons that might be effective against Chuyet. By now they have it and are on their way back. I want you to attack their force and steal the mask for us. In return, we will smuggle you out of the city so you can find your Brutaka. But be warned, the Matoran leader is a fanatic who would rather die than surrender his prize. You will have to grant him his wish. And just who is this leader? Asked Takanuva. No one you would know, said Makuta Krika. A Tamatoran, someone named Jala. To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 5. Toa Takanuva had experienced many strange things since arriving in what he now knew had to be some kind of alternate universe, but nothing quite equaled what he was experiencing right at the moment, the sensation of flying under his own power over a vast stretch of ocean. Even stranger was the fact that he had Makuta to thank for this ability. After telling him roughly where to look for the caravan that would be carrying the Mask of Time, Makuta Krika had commented that he would never be able to intercept them in time by sea, even if he managed to steal a boat and slip away from Metronui. Flight was the best choice. Before Takanuva could argue that he didn't have the ability to fly, Krika had blown a fine powder into his face. The Toa of Light couldn't help but breathe it in. With a laugh, Krika explained that he had just been exposed to a Makuta virus, which would, at least temporarily, give him the power of flight. If it had any other side effects, Krika chose not to say. Takanuva didn't know whether to thank him or hit him. Still, his directions had been good. Up ahead on the land, Takanuva spotted an Ussel crab-drawn cart driven by a Matoran, flanked by a Toa of Ice and a Toa of Earth mounted on Muaka tigers. Takanuva could only guess that both cart and Rahi had been loaded and unloaded from a ship, since part of the journey to Artaka had to be made by sea. Despite the Makuta's warning that he would have to kill the Toa and the Matoran with them, Jala, Takanuva had another idea. He was a Toa, after all, in a world dominated by them. It was worth trying anyway. He landed right in front of the cart, prompting Jala to rein it to an abrupt halt. The two Toa raised their spears and shields and took a step forward. "Who are you?" said the black-armored warrior. "Speak or face the power of my seismic spear." "What my grim friend is trying to say," said the Toa of Ice, "is that we were not expecting visitors, not even multi-toned ones such as yourself. Surprises make us nervous, and when we are nervous, other beings sometimes get hurt." "Lower your weapons," said the Toa of Light. "My name is Takanuva. I am here on business of the Empire." "I am Toa Kualis," said the white-armored Toa. "My surly friend is Toa Bomanga. And what might your business be, Takanuva?" "I don't trust him," said Jala. Takanuva barely recognized him in his red Kanohi Komau. "Kodan keeps a record of every Toa in the universe, and I've never seen his name before." Takanuva fired a thin beam of light at Jala, shooting the reins out of his hands. Puku, the Ussel crab, reared up, startled. "When I want your opinion, Matoran, I'll ask for it," Takanuva said, trying to sound like a Toa from this universe. Koalis' response was a blast of ice from his Sub-Zero spear, but Takanuva easily shadowed it with another light beam. Bumanga made a move to attack, but the Toa of Light temporarily blinded him with a flare. "If you're done," said Takanuva. "Tuyet has received word of a plan to steal the Mask of Time. She has decided that 2 Toa are not enough to guard it, particularly you 2. So she has sent me to join you." "And just what makes you the right choice," growled Brahmanga. The Toa of Light thought fast. "Have you ever heard of Takutanuva?" Both Toas shook their heads. "How about Gralak, the mighty ash bear?" Again they shook their heads. "And I suppose you haven't heard of the beasts of Mount Ihu, or the flame serpents of the Trencrom Break, or even," he dropped his voice for effect, "even the Koli creature of Gawahi." "We haven't heard of any of those things," said Koalis. Takanuva smiled, raised his lance high, and then plunged it into the sand in front of the 2 Toa. "There is a reason you haven't heard of them, brothers, and if I could defeat them, I can surely handle the threat to the Vahi." Bomanga and Koalis glanced at each other. Then Koalis shrugged. "Very well, brother. You may travel with us to Metronui, but since you are so powerful, why don't you walk in front of us? That way you can meet any challenge head on. Incidentally, who is it that plans to try to steal this mask from us? A very powerful and evil being called Brutaka, Takanuva replied. This time, the two Toa obviously recognized the name. Bomanga even smiled. You know of him then? Asked Takanuva. And well I should, said Bomanga. He plunged his spear into the ground next to Takanuva's lance. After all, I killed him. To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 6. Back when Takanuva was Takua, a Matoran of the village of Takoro, he had once found himself walking through a stretch of jungle, being stalked by a monstrous Nuijaga scorpion. Whenever he moved, the scorpion moved. If he stopped, it stopped. If he turned to face it, it would kill him, but if he led it back to the village, it might harm others before it was driven off. He was finally saved by a sudden inspiration. He changed direction and led the Nuijaga straight toward a Moaka cat cave. Angered at the intrusion into its territory by the other Rahi beast, the Moaka attacked the Nuijaga, and Takua escaped. Which just goes to show, thought Takanuva, nowadays there's never a Moaka around when you need one. Here he was, trudging across the barren plains of Karzani in this weird alternate universe. Behind him were two Toa, Bomanga and Koalas, both of whom served the oppressive dictatorship of the Toa Empire. Between them was Jala, a Matoran who in Takanuva's world was the Toa of Light's best friend. In this universe he was a servant of the Empire, transporting the Mask of Time back to Metru Nui. That wasn't the worst of it, though. Takanuva needed to find Brutaka and the Mask of Dimensional Gates if he was ever going to make it back to his own universe. And Bomanga had just announced that Brutaka was dead, killed by him. All of which left Takanuva exactly nowhere. Ah, Brutaka, said Bomanga. He fought well. But when he turned to fight Gaki and Pooks, I hit him from behind, and that finished him. Not very fair, muttered Takanuva. Fair? Asked Bomanga. He was an enemy of the Empire. He tried to prevent our lawful exploration of Oyanui. Who cares how he died as long as he's dead? Our friend Takanuva seems to be carrying a conscience, said Toa Koalas. That is a heavy burden in a place like this. You would be amazed how many poor dead beings I see on the side of the path who just couldn't go one more step with that load on their backs. Spare me the philosophy, snapped Takanuva. What about Brutaka's weapons and his mask? What happened to them? You should know, said Bomanga. If you really serve Toa Tuyet as you claim, any treasure like that gets brought to the Colosseum in Metru Nui for safekeeping. Right, naturally, said Takanuva. This was going to be a problem. How was he going to get into what had to be the most heavily guarded spot in Metru Nui to get that mask? You know, you remind me a little of someone, said Bomanga. A Toa of Water, one of Likan's old team. What was her name? Toa Naho, that was it. She came along on one of our missions to Odina to clean out that nest of stone rats. Offered to go after the Shadowed One herself, take all the risks. Turned out she was helping that creep escape. He got away, she didn't. Tuyet turned her over to her friend Rudaka, and, well, she wound up an interesting exhibit in the archives. Takanuva knew he should keep quiet, but he couldn't. Do you think this is what Tuyet really wanted? Toa betraying other Toa, Matoran living in fear of their heroes? Toa was supposed to be respected and look up to. But we are, said Koalas. Everyone respects what they fear, and they can't help but look up to us. We always look down on them. Takanuva heard a stirring behind him. He could guess what it was, Bomanga and or Koalas getting ready to blast him from behind. Well, there was no choice. He would have to try and take them both out and get the mask from Jala. It would take a lot of luck, probably more than he could hope for, but then he heard other sounds. A rush of wind, startled cries from the two Toa, which receded in the distance, then the sound of a cart crashing. He turned to see a strange Toa standing amidst the wreckage of Jala's Ussel cart. He was retrieving the Mask of Time, which lay next to the unconscious Jala. When he noticed Takanuva, he stopped. You're not one of them, the Toa of Air said. That's why you're still alive. Don't make me regret that decision. Who are you? Asked Takanuva. What do you want here? What do I want? Said the Toa. I want some peace. But I'm never going to get any while that crazy Toa of Water is running things. So I keep an eye out for things she wants, like this mask here, and I take them from her. That's why if you ever see her list of enemies of the Empire, you'll find my name at the top, Toa Lesevek. To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 7. Under the cover of darkness, Toa Lesovic and Toa Takanuva darted through the sculpture fields of Pometru. They had slipped back to Metronui via underwater chute a few hours before. Lesovic knew a few that were closed for repair but still functioning, and best of all, unguarded. "Where are we going?" whispered Takanuva. "The Colosseum is the other way. If Prutaka's mask is in there, that's where I need to go." "Right," said Lesovic, "but if you want to get in and out of there alive, we do it my way, and my way starts at the Throne of Stone." The Toa of Air pointed straight ahead. Not far away there was indeed a huge throne made of rock, mounted atop a base of rock-she parts. Pomatoran bearing torches surrounded it, and seated in the great chair was Toa Pohatu himself. Excuse me," said Takanuva. "I ran into Tahu and Kopaka not long ago, and are you sure this is a good idea?" "Trust me," said Lesovic, smiling. After a few hours, the Pomatoran left to go back to their homes. As Pohatu descended from his throne, Lesovic scraped 3 times with his armored boot against a nearby rock. The Toa of Stone stopped, head turned to listen. Then he said, "Lesovic, you are out of your mind." "It helps," said the Toa of Air, leading Takanuva to where Pohatu stood. "This is my new pal, Takanuva. He's looking for the 5-widget tour of the Colosseum, particularly the Hall of Masks." "Wait a minute," said Takanuva. "I don't understand any of this. Tahu, Pohatu, and the rest were supposed to stay asleep until they were needed to awaken Montanui, but Montanui never fell asleep here, so why are they here?" "He talks a lot, doesn't he?" Pohatu said to Lesovic. Lesovic shrugged. "Okay, Glowfish, let me tell you a story," Pohatu said. "Toa Tuyet found out where we were from Artaka. She sent some Toa in to find us, but none of them survived the trip. That was when she found a spot in the Colosseum no one had ever seen before, a place from which she could fake the signal that would launch our canisters. Next thing you know, here we are. She laid it all out for us, how the Makuta and the Dark Hunters were plotting a takeover, how it was our duty as Toa to stop them dead. It was the only way to make the universe really safe. So we all signed on. But after a while I started to have doubts. They turned into fears when I found out Tuyet had sent a squad headed by Toa Nadiki to wipe out the Ninra ghosts, just because they might someday make something that could be used against her. 4 dozen Matoran dead. Still makes me sick. That was when I made contact with Lesovic, and we've been working together ever since. Of course, Tuyet doesn't know that." "You're a regular stone wall of history," said Lesovic, "but it's going to be light soon. We need to get the troops together and get ready for a raid." Pohatu led the 2 Toa back to his cavern. Once inside, he used his power to send a mild tremor the length of Metronui, not enough to cause damage, just enough to signal those who would understand and respond. They started filtering in through underground tunnels not long after. Nuju, Akmu, 3 Dark Hunters, Guardian, Darkness, and Primal, 1 Toa, Krakua, and a Pomatoran that Lesovic introduced as Kodan. "It's handy to have the Toa's chronicler on our side," said Lesovic. "Helps us stay informed." "So what's the plan?" asked Takanuva. "We sneak in, steal the mask, and get out?" "He thinks small, too," Pohatu said to Lesovic. Lesovic shrugged. "Listen, Junior, I don't know where you came from or why," said Pohatu, "but I'm betting Tuyet doesn't know either, and maybe that gives us an edge. So we're putting everything on one Akalini play. Akmu here has alerted the Makuta in town. Darkness took care of any Dark Hunters nearby who are still on 2 legs. Everybody's in." "In what?" asked Takanuva. "Tuyet's had her own way for too long," Pohatu answered, grabbing a protosteel axe off the wall. "It's time to take her down." To be continued. Dark Mirror, Chapter 8. Takanuva crouched behind a wall, a wounded Lesovic beside him. All around, elemental power bursts were flying, warriors were screaming, and a disaster beyond his imagination was taking place. It had all started out so well. Lesovic's band had made it close to the Colosseum before being spotted. As planned, Takanuva had used his newfound shadow powers to blind the guards. Pohatu followed with a massive fist of stone that cracked the walls of the huge structure. To the east, Makuta Pterodax led Krika, Kojal, Taragaduma, and Takua into battle. At first they made short work of the Matoran and Toa who guarded Tuyet's fortress. Then it all went wrong. A Toa of iron appeared on the walls, and a hail of spikes spelled the end of Takua. Takanuva watched in sheer horror as his other self collapsed and died. Kojal fell next, his armor crushed by the Toa's power, and his essence incinerated by a Toa of plasma. Pterodax was forced to pull back. Things were going no better for Lesovic's squad. Primal had run into Tahu at the eastern entrance and killed the Toa of fire. but the sudden appearance of Gali and a sphere of water around the Dark Hunter's head left him to drown on dry land. Toa Krakua hit Gali with a wave of solid sound, blasting apart her mask and armor. Pohatu cried out too late. Akmu had already dashed ahead and slain the fallen Toa of water. He didn't get to enjoy his triumph long. Kopaka flash-froze Akmu, and a swipe from Anua's claws shattered the Matoran into little pieces of crystalline protodermis. Now it was no longer one battle, but a dozen separate ones being fought at once, the lines moving back and forth. Pohatu fought his way into the Colosseum, but found himself too evenly matched with Onua to make much progress. Lesovic fell with an ice dagger in his shoulder, but rallied to blow Kopaka off his post high atop the Colosseum. Takanuva winced as the toe of ice hit the ground and lay still. "Now," said Lesovic to Takanuva, "darkness will lead the way. Get in there and do what you have to." "What about you?" asked Takanuva. "We'll give them something to remember," said Lesovic. Takanuva took one last look around. Nuju was side by side with Guardian, keeping a Toa of magnetism too off balance to use his powers. Pterodax's forces had charged again. Krika used his vacuum power to absorb Lua's attacks until Pterodax could summon a bolt of lightning, powerful enough to turn a Toa to ashes. Darkness was already on the move, slipping through the cracks in the Colosseum walls. Takanuva used his shadow power to enlarge them, and followed. Inside, the Colosseum was strangely silent. One would never know a battle raged outside its walls. A team of Toa rushed by on their way to join the fight. Steeling himself, Takanuva fired laser blasts at the ceiling, bringing the rubble down on top of them. He still found himself hoping he had only stunned them, not killed them. Together, Toa and Dark Hunter fought their way to their goal, the Hall of Masks. They had made it to the chamber door when darkness paused. He heard something. The next instant the door exploded outward as a wall of water erupted from within, sweeping darkness away. Takanuva managed to grab hold of a doorway, holding on with all his might and holding his breath. Outside, Pterodax's attack had met with success, as Toa fell before him and Krika. Turagaduma had rallied Lesovic's group, although not before Nuju had been pulled into the archives by plant life gone wild. Guardian, too, fell, but took half a dozen Toa with him. Back in the Colosseum, the deluge had finally stopped. There, framed in the chamber door, stood Toa Tuyet, Nui stone in one hand, mask of dimensional gates in the other. "I know who you are," she said. "Or rather, I have guessed. You don't belong here." "Neither do you," said Takanuva. "You don't exist in my world. True Toa must have stood up and stopped you before you went too far." "In my world I am much more competent," she replied. "How unfortunate for you." "All right, then," said Takanuva. "For Takua, for Lesovic, and for all the Toa and Matoran whose lives you have ruined, I strike." To be concluded. Dark Mirror, Chapter 9. Toa Tuyet stood over the battered, semi-conscious body of Takanuva, Toa of Light. He did not stir. Being blown through half a dozen walls by a focused tidal wave will do that to you. Tuyet smiled.
Pathetic. Truly pathetic. If you are an example of what a Toa are like in your universe, it's a wonder you haven't all been hunted to extinction by now.
The ruler of the Toa Empire slipped off her mask of intangibility and replaced it with the Kanohi Olmak, the mask Takanuva had come seeking. This mask alone had the power to open gateways to interdimensional space, and it was Takanuva's only hope of escaping this twisted world.
Your friends outside are dead, or soon will be. I admit I was surprised to find they still had some fight left in them after 3,500 years. But they can't be allowed to rob the Matoran of the peace I have brought them.
Takanuva managed to get to his hands and knees, rubble sliding off his back as he did so. He looked at Tuyet with eyes that held equal parts of contempt and pity. "Peace," he said in disbelief. "Is that what you call perverting the Toa into secret police, terrorizing villagers, killing anyone who opposes your rule?"
I did what had to be done. I made the world right. And who are you to judge me? You are nothing but an alien from some other dimension.
Takanuva hurled a blast of shadow at Tuyet, temporarily cloaking her in darkness. By the time she could see again, he was gone. But his voice came from high above her, saying, "That's true. My world is messier than yours, more dangerous in some ways, but it's a world that's better because you're not in it, Tuyet." The Toa of Water unleashed her power, bringing the ceiling down, but Takanuva was not there. Instead, he sprang from the opening at the far end of the hall, hurling blinding light at Tuyet as he made a grab for her mask. She spun, caught him by the arm, and threw him hard to the floor.
I have hundreds of times your power. You are nothing but a light stone to be ground to the dust beneath my heel.
Takanuva attacked again, hurling bolts of shadow and light. To his amazement, Tuyet parried them with ease. Seeing his surprise, she laughed.
You know, we had no toe of light in this universe. We didn't need one, and in a few moments, we will be back to being without one.
Takanuva charged. The next few seconds were a blaze of battle, lasers turning water to steam, waves crashing against walls, a race to see what would happen first, Takanuva drowning in the tide, or Tuyet drowning in darkness. When the fight was through, Tuyet stood once more triumphant.
Enough! I have wasted enough time on you. Your rebellion is finished, and now so are you.
Tuyet was about to strike when a strange sound penetrated the damaged Colosseum. Takanuva raised his head and glanced out a hole in the wall. He saw hundreds, no thousands of Matoran marching toward the building, all of them armed. In the distance he could see airships and seagoing vessels carrying other Matoran, Dark Hunters, Vortex, and others. All of them were descending on the city, their eyes fixed on the Colosseum. Still think the rebellion is over? Takanuva asked. Or maybe it's just beginning.
The fools! With my power I can sweep them all away in a flood like no one has seen before.
Takanuva looked right into Tuyet's eyes. Then who would there be left to protect? Who would you have made your perfect universe for? Tuyet smiled.
Very clever, Toa. True, a universe with only drowned Matoran would not be of much to anyone. But they must be taught respect.
Why? If they are so ungrateful, why not use your mass to travel somewhere else? Someplace that needs you. Start over again in another Metro Nui, one where they might welcome a ruler like you. Tuyet glanced down at the street. The mob was coming closer, and though she could easily kill them all, it would leave her as the ruler of an empire of corpses. Perhaps Takanuva was right. At the least, she could leave and return with an army of Toa from some other dimension, enough to stamp out every last vestige of rebellion in her own world. She turned away and activated her mask. A portal into interdimensional space opened before her, and she prepared to step in. That was when Takanuva made his move. He somehow managed to hurl himself at Tuyet, snatching the mask from her face. The second it lost contact with her, its power shut off and the portal began to close. Takanuva, mask in hand, dove through, but Tuyet was not about to let him escape so easily. Even as he cleared the portal, she grabbed onto his leg, trying to follow him. She blasted him with hard bolts of water, catching his hand and tearing the mask from his grasp. It floated away into the space between dimensions. Takanuva turned back. What he saw horrified him, but his shouted warning came too late. Tuyet was halfway through the portal, trying to drag Takanuva back in. She was so consumed by rage that she never noticed the portal closing until it was much too late. She screamed as reality slammed shut on her body, leaving her upper half in the void and her lower half in the Colosseum on her world. Mercifully, death came instantly. Takanuva hovered in space for a long moment. He wondered what would happen in Tuyet's universe with her gone. Would the Toa become protectors again? Would the Matoran take control? Or would some group like the Dark Hunters or Makuta become new dictators? Perhaps someday, if he was able, he would return to find out the answer. He turned his head away from the remains of Tuyet, wondering how a Toa could go so wrong, and realizing with a shudder what a very fine line it could be between justice and tyranny. Tuyet's life had been wasted, but the lives of no more Toa would be lost if he could prevent it. With grim resolve, he resumed his journey to Cardanui. The end. Destiny War, Chapter 1. Axon charged across the landscape of Voyanui, weapon at the ready. He had just spied two figures materializing in the green belt. One looked something like Botar, but obviously wasn't. The other resembled a Toa, but wasn't one Axon knew. The first thing he had learned after being assigned to this place was subdue first, ask questions later. The Botar look-alike spotted Axon first and tried to block him. The sweep of an armored fist sent him sprawling. Axon was on top of the Toa in the flash of a heartlight, axe blade at the intruder's throat. "Who are you?" growled Axon. "What do you want here? Talk!" "My name is Krakua," the Toa answered, trying in vain to push the axe away from his neck. "I was sent to find you. You're needed." "Who sent you?" asked Axon. "Toa Helrix. Use your mask. You'll see I'm speaking the truth." Axon did just that, calling on the powers of his Kanohi Road, the Mask of Truth. To his surprise, it told him that his captive was indeed being honest. He got up and let Krakua get to his feet. "Your order of Matanui, then," Axon said. "I see recruiting standards have slipped a little." Krakua paid no attention to the remark. Instead, he said, "Come with us. Your presence is required on Daxia." Before Axon could object, the Botar type had come close and activated his teleportation power. The three of them vanished from Voyanui, only to reappear in the Order of Motunui fortress on Daxia. Axon had been there before, so its appearance was no surprise to him. The sight of his former partner Brutaka was, though, not to mention the huge dragon next to him, whose bulk almost filled up the Great Hall. "Things must be desperate if they're calling on an old war Rahi like you," Brutaka said with a smile. "Oh, by the way, have you met Tall, Green, and Gruesome here? Don't mind the scales and teeth, but you might want to stay downwind of him." "Brutaka," said Axon, how did you get out of the pit?" "They let me out early for good behavior," Brutaka smiled. "But I'm the least of the shocking faces around here. This is it, my friend. The Order is about to come out of hiding after all these years. Helrix told me so herself." "What did she say?" "2 words," said Brutaka, his smile disappearing. "Destiny War." The Dark Hunter, known as Ancient, stood on the beach of the island of Odina. Behind him, rebuilding of the fortress destroyed by Pohatu Nuva went on rapidly. His eyes scanned the waters, watching for the return of Lariska from her mission. He was anxious to hear just what she had seen and heard. A cry made him look up. It came from a bat-winged Rahi wheeling through the sky, one not native to Odina. He recognized the creature as one bred for long-distance flying. More than once, the Dark Hunters had used them to send messages back and forth to agents on other islands. But the flying creature up above did not come from another Dark Hunter. As a half-dozen more joined it, they began flying in a pattern recognizable to no one on the island but Ancient. It was a message intended for him, and one that was urgent. The time had come. He had to seek out the Shadowed One and try to make him see the only possible future for the Dark Hunters, and if the Shadowed One, his old friend, failed to see reason, Ancient would have to kill him. Elsewhere, Vezon paced in his cell on Daxia. Across the corridor were 2 great water tanks. In one swam the 6 Paraka, now mutated into water snakes. In the other was a bizarre-looking being others referred to as Karzani, who seemed to Vezon to be quite insane, and Vezon knew insane. When Brutaka's team had first escaped the island of Artidax with Makuta Mizarix, they had flown to a barren island in the middle of nowhere. After a short time, Brutaka had them on the move again, this time to a place called Daxia. Brutaka explained that the location of the island had always been a secret before, but that secrecy didn't matter anymore. Neither, apparently, did Gratitude, as Vezon and Brutaka were both thrown into cells immediately upon arrival. Vezon, frankly, was disappointed. Sure, he had tried to steal the Mask of Life, and yes, he had tried to kill the Toa Nika once, well, twice, and okay, he had made an effort to trade their lives to the Zyglak in exchange for his, but it's not like that had worked. And he had volunteered, well, been forced, well, actually been threatened with bodily harm if he didn't help, but he did aid in the rescue of Makuta Mizarix. And what was his reward? A cold cell, an uncaring guard, and nothing nearby he could use to kill the Paraka. Was that justice? His musings were interrupted by the crimson-armored Trinuma. The Order member took a long look at Vezon, shrugged, and shook his head. Then he unlocked the cell door and threw it open. "It's your lucky day, misfit," said Trinuma. "You're getting out." "I am," said Vezon. Of course I am. Keeping a being of my brilliance locked away is a terrible waste of resources. No doubt your masters want to consult me on matters of strategy and tactics." "No," said Trinuma. "I think they said something about needing someone who could die horribly without being missed. So naturally they thought of you." Vezon's addled brain processed what Trinuma said and somehow decided it was a compliment. "Well, naturally," he replied. "Lead on and let me show you all how dying's done." To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 2. Axon crouched down behind a low stone wall and watched the fire and ice bolts fly by overhead. Beside him, Brutaka was peering around the crumbling bit of cover, now and then hurling a blast from his sword. "Knock on the front door," grumbled Axon. "Great strategy. I think all that time in Mari Nui left you with a waterlogged brain." "Oh, come on," said Brutaka, smiling. He picked off an attacker with a bolt of energy, then winged another. "You love this, and you know it. After thousands of years sitting around on Voyanui waiting for something to happen, you need the exercise." A green-fleshed Skakti climbed over the wall, spiked club in hand. Axon quickly made him regret it. This was supposed to be a nice, simple job. Go to Zakaz, find Warlord Nektan, arrange an alliance between the Order and the Skakti, not get pinned on a beach by an angry horde. "Are we pinned?" "We're not pinned," said Brutaka. "Watch." Brutaka popped over the wall and fired an energy bolt at a half-crumbled building. Shearing through its only support, he sent the structure toppling down on a mob of Skakti. When the dust cleared, all of them were trapped beneath the rubble. "Now those guys, they're pinned," said Brutaka. Axon sighed. "Just like the good old days," he said. "Now I remember why I hated them so much." "If you like that idea, you'll love this one," Brutaka replied. Before Axon could react, Brutaka grabbed him by the back of the neck. He dragged Axon to his feet and stood beside him, free arm in the air. "We surrender," Brutaka shouted to the Skakti army. "Take us, we're yours." Elsewhere. A trader on the island of Stelt would, over the course of his life, see pretty much everything at least once. The place was a crossroads for the crooked, the desperate, and those just looking for fast money or a deal best kept hidden from Toa. This particular trader, though, had recently seen more than he would have wished. A small group of warriors, including the hated Rudaka, had stolen one of his best ships. Worse, they had done it in such a way that no one would even believe it had happened. Things had at last settled down, though. He had managed to find a replacement ship and recover those members of the old crew who were still alive. It was back to business as usual, at least until the 20-foot-tall dragon tore the roof off his shop. "Where's Pterodax?" the dragon growled. "Pterodax? Who or what is that? And how would I know?" said the trader, reaching frantically for a weapon and coming up with nothing better than a cracked Kanoka disc. "I know Stelt," said the dragon. "A Nui Rama doesn't buzz on the Trencrom Peninsula without you scum hearing it. So I'll ask again, where is he? Where is the Makuta of Metronui?" "I don't know, I swear it," shouted the trader. The dragon scooped his victim up in a great claw. "I don't have time for this. I have places to be and bodies to break. I want you to send out a message to all your friends, to everyone who sails in and out of this island. Tell them Miserix is back, and when I find him, Pterodax is dead." Elsewhere once more. Vezon sat in a small skiff with a jet-black sail. Trinuma sat at the bow, keeping an eye out for potential threats. If he considered Vezon one, he didn't show it. For his part, Vezon was just happy to be out of his cell. Prison was far too confining, but then he guessed that was the point of it. Speaking of points, Trinuma had given him a lovely dagger. Vezon had said thank you by not trying to plunge it into his companion's back. "Where are we going?" asked Vezon. "Why are we going? Are we going at all, or just sailing in a big circle? Or is it a spiral? I went down a spiral once, a big stone tunnel that went down and down and down, and ended in Zyglak. Whoever built it had no decorating sense at all." "Would you be quiet?" said Trinuma. "This is a secret mission. Do you understand that?" "Sure," answered Vezon. "Secret mission means if you get killed, I won't tell anyone. And you still haven't answered any of my 110 questions or my follow-ups." Trinuma sighed in resignation. "We're going to a place called Destral. Once we get there, your job starts. If you succeed, you live to babble another day. If you fail, you die horribly. Okay?" Destral. Wait a minute, that's a Makuta base. Spiria was a Makuta, at least he was until Miserix killed him. I flew with Miserix, did I tell you that? At least until he did those loops and threw me off his back. Ocean water is really cold, don't let anyone tell you different. So what am I supposed to do on Destral? Theft? Assassination? Running with sharp objects? "You have the most important job of all," said Trinuma. "You're going to betray the Order of Motunui and the entire universe, and this is how you're going to do it." To be continued. Destiny War, Part 3. One of the peculiar things about a Skakti warlord's base is the lack of any kind of a dungeon, torture chamber, or prisoner of war camp. History has shown that there's very little point in torturing a Skakti, as they never talk except in trade, usually for their freedom, which few captors will agree to. And keeping prisoners means listening to them whine for trivial things like food, water, and a good-sized club to use on the stone rats who keep paying midnight visits. So when Brutaka and Axon were marched into Warlord Nektan's camp, no one seemed quite sure what to do with them. Killing them immediately came to mind, but then it would be impossible to find out why they were on the island to start with. Unlike the famed necrofinch of the Zakaz Mountains, most beings did not continue to sing after they were dead. It was Axon who insisted that they be brought before Nektan himself. Nektan was larger than the average Skakti, or at least appeared so, sitting on his throne made from the fused weapons of his foes. He was accompanied by his pet, which looked like a Mawaka cat covered in spiked armor. Nektan, ever the gracious host, asked them if they had anything to say before he had them painfully disassembled. "Yes," said Axon. the Brotherhood of Makuta. Nektan spat on the ground. The Muwaka growled. What about them? Asked the warlord. We offer you a chance to sack their fortresses, loot their weapons, and slay their warriors, Axon said. We'd throw in make their women weep, but have you ever seen a female Makuta? Added Brutaka. It's not pretty. Why should I listen to you when it would be so much quicker and easier to throw you into the Tatarak pens? Because we have already been to see the other warlords of Zakaz, lied Axon. What, did you think we would come to this puny hole first? They have all agreed to ally with us. If you refuse, you can sit on your petty throne and watch as they grow rich and powerful. Nektan frowned, the only expression uglier than a Skakti smile. No self-respecting warlord wanted to be left out of a chance at glorious battle and even more glorious loot. In the end, he nodded. Why did you tell him we had talked to the other warlords? Whispered Brutaka. We still have to go to all their camps and talk them into an alliance. That's a lot of work, Axon agreed, so I guess you better get started. Toamari Jala stood in the center of Metronui, gazing up at the statue of the late Matoro. It had been constructed by Turaga Anua himself as a tribute to the fallen hero. It was good to know his comrade was remembered and always would be, but it did little to dispel the grief he felt over his death. He had to admit, thoughts of Matoro distracted him. When the other Toamari left to search the city for Takanuva, he chose to remain behind. When they returned, reporting there had been no sign of the Toa of Light, he hardly paid any attention. It still troubled him that the Toamari had been unable to fulfill their destiny without losing one of their own. Behind him he could hear the other Toa in conference. Metronui was quiet for now, with the Cardus dragons subdued and most of the other Rahi back in the archives. Still, the heroes could never relax. Who knew where the next threat would come from? There was a sudden flash of light. When Jala could see again, 6 Toa stood in front of him. He didn't recognize any of them. Instinctively, he readied his weapons. Welcome to Metronui, said Jala. Who are you? Why have you come here? One of the newcomers, a Toa of Fire also, stepped forward. My name is Norik, of the Toahaga. I ask you and your teammates to stand aside. We have no wish to see anyone hurt while we carry out our task here. The Toamari stand aside for no one, said Toahuki, stepping forward. Tell us your business here or be considered our enemies. Our business, said Norik. It is as simple as it is terrible. We have come to destroy the Colosseum. Vezon landed hard on the stone floor of the Makuta fortress of Destral. He had been captured by Rakshi less than 2 minutes after Trinuma had dropped him off on the shore of the island. Vezon had never met a Rakshi before and found he disliked them. Most beings had a scent, either pleasant or unpleasant. Rakshi smelled of cold metal and death. The Makuta who came to greet him wore armor of purple and crimson. Although Vezon was polite enough to introduce himself, the Makuta did not bother to share his name. Vezon was tempted to complain about this, but the spear at his throat, the one dripping acid, convinced him to save it for another time. Who are you? Said the Makuta. What are you? And how came you here? My name is Vezon, your darkness, and I was brought here by an agent of a power that wishes you and your brotherhood harm. They wanted me to come and tell you that they exist, and plan to attack this island, but I'm not going to do that. No, no, no. You just did, said the Makuta. Behind Vezon, 3 Rakshi moved a little closer, staffs at the ready. Well, of course I did, but only to tell you that I won't, said Vezon, exasperated. How could this being hope to conquer the universe and yet be so slow? It's all a trick, you see. They want me to pretend to betray them. They want you to concentrate your forces here against an attack that won't come. But I decided, why pretend to betray them when actually doing it would be so much more fun? The Makuta grabbed Vezon by the throat and slammed him against the wall. Speak, fool, and let only truth and clarity come from your mouth if you wish to continue having one. Truth and clarity. Truth and clarity. I don't think I know them, answered Vezon. Will you settle for white-lipped and trembling? This order of Motunui, it plans to mass an army and a navy, threaten Destral, force you to teleport it away from where it is now, and then... When Vezon did not continue speaking right away, the Makuta tightened his grip. All right, I was only pausing for effect. They have a spy inside this fortress. They've sabotaged your means of teleportation. When you try to use it again, well, I wouldn't start reading any long tablets, let's put it that way. And now that you know, tell me, what are we going to do about it? To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 4. Axon and Brutaka stood on a steep rise overlooking a battlefield. Down below, the assembled might of the Skakti of Zakaz were locked in combat with a small army of Rakshi. The setting was an unnamed island in one of the southern chains, set up as a staging area by the Brotherhood of Makuta for an invasion of the mainland continent. The Rakshi had been brought there in secret and allowed to practice their skills on the scattered Matoran residents. Needless to say, there were no longer any Matoran on this island. Initially, the Skakti had suffered horrible losses, but they were capable of something that the Rakshi could only pretend to: rage. Hungry for victory and filled with hatred for their enemy, the barbarians regrouped and tore through the Rakshi ranks. It was overwhelming, thrilling, and sickening all at once. "Come on," said Brutaka, tearing himself away from the spectacle. "You know what we're here for." Together they walked down the hill and deep into a small canyon. In the center, buried beneath a slab of rock, was a square metal trapdoor with an iron ring. After Axon split the rock with his axe, Brutaka grasped the ring and pulled open the door. A stench rose from within, the smell of age and neglect, decay and rot. The two Order of Matanui members climbed down into the hole. Axon sent energy through his axe, illuminating the chamber. It was obvious that no one had walked here since perhaps the beginning of recorded time. The place was bare stone, with the only interesting feature a pool in the center. The waters were greenish-black and swirled angrily, despite there being not even the slightest breeze to stir them. "So this is it?" asked Brutaka. Axon nodded. "Yes, this is the place the Great Spirit created the Makuta, and the only place new Makuta could ever spring from. From that pool came their substance, made into living form by the powers of the Great Spirit, until time turned it all into pure energy." "Then if we destroy the pool," said Brutaka. "Yes, there can be no more Makuta ever." "But do we have a right to end a species?" Brutaka was looking at the pool, eyes wide. "I'd love to get into a philosophical debate with you, old friend, but I think we have a problem." The waters of the pool suddenly exploded up and outward. Foul, scalding liquid struck Axon and Brutaka, seeping in through the openings in their masks and armor, and hissed and writhed like a thing alive, burning wherever it touched. Temporarily blinded and in pain, the two warriors staggered and then stumbled, plunging into the pool itself. Toa Helric sat in the command chamber of her fortress on Daxia. The war against the Brotherhood of Makuta had begun, and had not begun well. Although the Order, through the Dark Hunters, now held Zia, they had been unable to dislodge Makuta forces from the island of Ninra. In other places, the Order's surprise attacks had met unexpectedly fierce resistance from Rakshi and Exotoa. Being a leader meant making difficult decisions, something she had always known. In her time, she had sent agents on missions she knew they might well not come back from. She had ordered the deaths of everyone who knew the location of Artaka, and now she had to make two more vital choices that might lead to victory or disaster. The first had been easy. She had dispatched a messenger to Metro Nui carrying the heart of the Visorak. This artifact could be used to summon the Visorak hordes from anywhere in the universe. It was to be placed in the hands of the Toamari, with instructions to bring it to the volcanic island of Artidax and use it there. The second was more difficult. Brutaka had informed her of the presence of Hydraxon in the pit, as well as the events that took place there. A second messenger had been sent to the pit with orders for the jailer. She could not be sure he would follow them, given their nature, or she would simply be trading the Brotherhood in the end for a worse evil. But it had to be done. Sometimes she hated being the one in charge. Hydraxon paced the dark, cavernous chamber that was the pit. In his hand he held a tablet that contained orders from Helrix. The instructions carved in the stone were almost impossible to believe. The chamber door opened. It was Toa Lesovic, bringing back another escaped prisoner. Although the two had clashed on first meeting, they had since become allies in the effort to recapture the former inmates of this vast prison. Hydraxon hesitated to show the orders to Lesovic. After all, the existence of the Order of Matanui was supposed to be a secret. But if the situation as outlined on the tablet was true, then he guessed it was a secret no longer. Lesovic let out a low whistle as he read the tablet. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. "What I've always done," Hydraxon answered. "Follow orders." He climbed down the iron ladder that led to the lowest tier of cells. Here Pradek, Kalma, Mantax, and Alek were imprisoned. The four Baraki looked at their jailer with undisguised contempt. "Have you come here to mock us?" snarled Mantax. Pradek smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "We killed you once, you know. We can do it again." Hydraxon ignored the obvious insanity. After all, he was alive and well, so obviously he had never been dead. "I have an offer for you," he said, forcing out each word. "There's a war going on. A war to bring the reign of the Brotherhood of Makuta to an end. Agree to fight against the Makuta, and you will get your freedom." "And if we refuse," said Kalma, "why should we risk our lives to fight someone else's war?" "If you refuse," said Hydraxon, "you will find that there are places you can be buried far deeper than this pit." "Another chance," said Prodak. "Another chance to fight, to lead armies, to conquer. And when the Brotherhood falls, the League of Six Kingdoms will rise again." To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 5. The Shadowed One, master of the Dark Hunters, mortal enemy of the Makuta, thief, assassin, and conqueror, was bored. Since he and his people had been dispatched to occupy the island of Zia by the order of Motunui, there had been precious little to do. The island had been pacified in a matter of hours. Except for the occasional 2 or 3 Dark Hunters tapped by the order for a mission, the bulk of their forces had yet to act. The Shadowed One did not like feeling penned in on this island, or ignored. That was why this day found him prowling the factories of Zia, seeking amusement. Despite his pressure to get all manufacturing centers working again, many of the buildings were still badly damaged by the battle between the Tatarak and the Kanohi Dragon. It was while walking through one such building that he came upon a vortex frantically clearing away rubble. "What are you doing here?" asked the Shadowed One. The vortex gasped, surprised. When he saw who was addressing him, he dropped to one knee and bowed his head. The vortex, it seemed, had a long history of knowing when and to whom to submit. "Nothing, great lord," said the vortex. "Just cleaning up so all factories can be working again as you ordered." The Shadowed One said nothing. He knew what a lie sounded like. He had told enough of them himself. After several moments, he said, "Then I will help you." "No," the vortex cried out. That's not necessary. This is work for a laborer, not a ruler like yourself." Power flashed out from the Shadowed One's staff. A band of crystalline protodermis appeared around the vortex's mouth, gagging him. "I said, I will help you," repeated the Shadowed One. Striding over to the heap of rubble, the Shadowed One began to dig, never taking his eye off the vortex. The deeper he got, the more visibly upset the Zia natives seemed to be. What, he wondered, was waiting at the bottom of this hole? He soon found out. Several feet down, he came upon a protosteel box. Burned into the lid was the symbol of the Brotherhood of Makuta. The box was locked, but the lock was no match for the now very curious Dark Hunter. He opened it carefully. After all, this might be some clever trap. But when he saw what the box contained, his eyes widened. "Oh, my," said the Shadowed One, as he gazed on something that soon might make him master of the world. Vaison, it could truly be said, had a unique perspective on life. Perhaps it was the fact that he had only been truly alive for a matter of weeks. Perhaps it was his time spent wearing the mask of life. Or perhaps it was just the fact that he was hopelessly insane. But the perspective he had today, he had to admit, was a new one, upside down. The Makuta he had encountered in the fortress of Destral, who identified himself with a laugh as Tridax, had not entirely believed Vaison's story about cross and double-cross. In fact, he decided some follow-up questions were in order, the kind delivered while your guest is hanging from the ceiling by his ankles. "I have checked our teleportation technology," Tridax said. "There is no sign of sabotage. You are a liar." "Well, no one ever said Makuta were observant," said Vaison. "How can you be so sure? Suppose I sabotaged it myself, using my incredible powers of the mind." "You have no powers," said the Makuta, picking up a wickedly sharp blade. "You have no mind. You are about to have no head." You're right, babbled Vaison. "There is no army, there is no navy. I simply wanted the pleasure of your company. Well, pleasure might be too strong a word. Did I tell you I once wore the mask of life? One stray thought back then, and you wouldn't even have left ashes. I do miss those days. Anyway, take pride in being correct. There's no threat to Destral at all." The walls of the fortress suddenly shook violently from an incredible impact. "Except that one," Vaison added helpfully. Rock dust fell from the ceiling, masks and weapons clattered to the floor, and even the anchors of Vaison's chains came loose. A second blast tore a hole in the wall and sent mangled Rakshi flying into the chamber. This time the anchors came loose all the way, and Vaison fell to the stone floor. Makuta Tridax was paying no attention. His orders were clear. Maintain Destral in its current location unless attacked. In the event of a serious threat from Terror or Dark Hunters, teleport the island off the shores of Metronui and seize that city. He stalked off to carry out those commands. Vaison followed behind, unnoticed. That's right, thought the deranged ex-prisoner. Lead me to your secrets. Ah, this plan is so cunning it might almost be one of mine, and perhaps it will be before I'm done. Far to the west, Prydak watched a fortress burn and smiled at the sight. He had been fortunate since his release from the pit. His captors had provided him with ships and the resources with which to raise an army. From the worst holes in the universe, he had found ex-Dark Hunters, exiled Vortex, even a Skakti or two for his crews. Before Kalma had even devised a battle plan, Prydak had sailed off without him on a voyage of conquest. It felt good. Good to sack and burn and destroy again. Good to feel the warm glow of the lightstones on his body, even if his water-filled helmet kept him from smelling the wonderful smoke and the stench of battle. He was back, and back to stay. His men had routed the forces of Makuta who occupied this place, but had found no actual Brotherhood member. Now, as he surveyed his conquest, a few things captured his notice. The structure was not original. It had been rebuilt on the site of an earlier strongpoint. The lower levels were still incomplete, and it was while exploring them that he found a strange room. Deep below the basements was a room of rubble. The walls had been smashed, leaving only packed earth behind, and the remnants of those walls lay littered around the floor. Intrigued, he picked one of the pieces up, only to find there was an inscription on it. The symbols made no sense to him, and he was about to throw it away, when he noticed that another piece also had such an inscription. In fact, all the pieces did. There was some sort of message here, or there had been, he realized. Someone had tried to destroy it by shattering the walls, but the message was still here for someone who had the discipline to decipher it. And if someone had thought whatever information it contained worthy of destruction, it must be quite interesting indeed. With the infinite patience of a born hunter, Prydak began to assemble the stones. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 6. Axon was drowning. The greenish-black fluid filled his mouth and lungs before he could react. His mighty arms flailed about, trying to find something to grab onto, and failing. As he sank further toward the bottom, Axon knew that here, in the birthplace of the Makuta species, he was going to die. Then he was suddenly rising rapidly up through the murky liquid. A strong hand had a hold of him and was yanking him away from his fate. A moment later he felt the hard stone of the floor beneath him. He choked and gasped. When the colors finally stopped swirling in front of his eyes, he looked up at his rescuer. Brutaka floated 3 feet off the floor. Green fire crackled from his eyes and the tips of his fingers. His armor had cracked in numerous places as the tissue it covered expanded. An aura of pure power surrounded him, so bright that Axon had to raise a hand to protect his sight. "Axon," said Brutaka, "we are glad to see you have survived." "We?" "Brutaka, what's happened to you?" We are the essence of the Makuta species. We know what they were meant to know, but have forgotten. We see the error, the flaws, so much to repair, but it cannot be done." Axon stood, axe at the ready. He knew the effects Makuta antidermis had on Brutaka. Absorbing it somehow made him stronger, but he had never seen or heard of anything like this. It was Brutaka's body and Brutaka's voice, but the words did not come from his old friend. "Spherus Magna, the shattering," Brutaka muttered, seemingly more to himself than to Axon. "The 3 that must be one, the 2 that must make them one." Brutaka abruptly reached out and seized Axon's arm in a grip of iron. His touch burned, but Axon fought back the urge to scream. He must remember. He must be made to see, or the journey of 100,000 years will be for nothing. He hides beneath, preparing to meet his destiny. We must go there. We must right the wrong. So many wrongs, before the shattering can end. Ancient climbed a low rise, stepping carefully to avoid tripping over the rubble that was once a Zeon factory. He had been searching for the Shadowed One for the better part of an hour. They were supposed to be discussing the defense of the city, but the Dark Hunter leader was nowhere to be found. He was concerned. Toa Helrix had asked that Ancient, her spy within the Dark Hunters, for regular reports on the state of things in Zia and the Shadowed One's actions. She fully expected a Brotherhood of Makuta attack on the island, and he was already overdue with his latest dispatch. Ancient reached the top of the rise. The first thing he saw was the Shadowed One standing amid a pile of debris. He was holding a small chest, which was open, and staring at the contents with a nasty smile on his face. As Ancient drew closer, he noticed 2 other things. A dead Vortex on the ground, his face encased in crystalline protodermis, And just what was in the chest. 3 vials. "What have you found?" asked Ancient, "and why would a vortex be foolish enough to challenge you for it?" The Shadowed One looked up, surprised. Then, seeing it was Ancient, he visibly relaxed. "A most amazing thing," he said. "Have you ever heard of Makuta Kojal?" Ancient nodded. He knew the story from the Order of Motunui. Kojal had been visiting Zia to discuss having a virus added into a weapon the Vortex were building for the Makuta. During his visit, he was accidentally killed by a different virus, except it was no accident, but an order operation to remove him. "He brought any number of viruses with him when he came to Zia," the Shadowed One continued. "Some were never found. The story was they were incinerated along with his armor. But they weren't, and I have found them." Ancient tried not to look as worried as he felt. Weapons like this in the hands of the Dark Hunters was a disaster in the making. "Excellent," he said. "We can ransom these for a good price." "Ransom them?" said the Shadowed One. No, I intend to make use of them. I will learn what they are and what they do, and then Helrix and the Makuta will answer to me. But I will need time, a great deal of time, and privacy to work. No one must know I have them. That is why the Vortex here had to die. And it's why twin beams of power lanced out of the Shadowed One's eyes, striking Ancient. The veteran Dark Hunter vanished, disintegrated by the force of the blast. "Apologies, old friend," the Shadowed One said, "but you know the old saying, a secret shared is no longer a secret." Vezon stalked through the halls of the fortress of Destral, following Makuta Tridax and doing his best to remain unseen. The walls of the ancient structure shook from a ferocious pounding. The Order of Motunui had launched his attack on the Makuta base at last. His mission was simple, purposely so that even his deranged mind could keep it straight. He was to follow Tridax, find the means the Makuta used to teleport the island from place to place, and then disable it. He would then most likely be killed by Tridax, but then no plan was perfect. At first it seemed like all was proceeding as expected. Tridax made his way into a sub-basement, seemingly oblivious to being followed. At the bottom of the basement was a massive chamber. What waited within that chamber staggered even the deeply disturbed Vezon. The walls towered 40 feet all around. Lining them were stasis tubes, close to 100, and each tube was occupied by an identical figure. A few had armor of jet black, most white and gold, but it was obvious they were all the same being. They were in some kind of stasis. Tridax walked to the center of the room where a small table sat. On the table was a Kanohi mask. Tridax reached for it, then suddenly whirled and hurled a blast of shadow at Vezon. Before he could dodge, the shadow had pinned him to the wall. "Did you think I could not hear your clumsy attempt to follow me?" said Tridax. "Very well, Skakti trash. You want to learn the most powerful secret of Destral? You want the satisfaction of knowing what hides here before you die? Look around." Vezon did, but he didn't learn anything more by doing that. "Quite a collection," he said. "I prefer seashells myself, sometimes leaves. Oh, and the heads of my enemies, though those take up so much space." Tridax smiled and held up the mask. "Do you know what this is?" "A Kanohi Olmec, the Mask of Dimensional Gates, one of only 2 known to be in existence. Not long ago, my fellow Makuta Mutran and I began experiments to develop a creature called a Shadow Leech, a creature that could drain the light out of others and turn them to beings of shadow. That was what sparked my idea. I knew the mask could reach not only other places in this dimension, but other realities as well, and so I have begun traveling to those other realities and collecting the Toa Takanuva of each, bringing him back here and feeding his light to my pets. When I am done, I will have an army of Shadow Toa, all made from the most dangerous enemy of the Makuta." The wall shook again. "I think you better hurry up and finish then," suggested Vezon. "No need," said Tridax. "I have only to release the Shadow Takanuva I have already made, and they will dispose of the attackers. And then I can go back to work in earnest, and then I can—" Tridax stopped at the sound of crystal shattering. Startled, he let his shadow power lapse. Vezon slumped to the ground, but not before he saw the Makuta looking at his arm in horror. Something was dissolving his armored gauntlet before his eyes, and his antidermis was leaking out into the air. 2 beings stepped out of the shadows. One was a Matoran, the other another species, very tall and very dangerous in appearance. He looked at the Makuta and laughed, a harsh and malicious sound. "The most dangerous enemy of the Makuta," said Tobduck. "Get ready. You're just about to meet him." To be continued in Brothers in Arms, Part 6. Destiny War, Chapter 7. Toa Helrix, leader of the Order of Motunui, picked her way across the remains of a battlefield. She was on the beach of the island of Ninra, site of a struggle between the Brotherhood of Makuta and the Order. After a long and furious battle, the Order had won, driving the Brotherhood forces from the island or crushing them on the beach. Now she wandered the sands, occasionally picking up a piece of Rakshi armor, studying it for a moment, and then discarding it. There was a method to her madness. Using her mask of power, Helrix could read the past of an object simply by touching it. Her goal here was simple. Rakshi were created using a powerful substance called energized protodermis. The Order wanted to know every source of that substance used by the Makuta so they could capture or destroy those sources. Without them, no new Rakshi could come into being. So far, all the ones she had identified here were sources the Order already knew about. Still, it was worth the effort. It would be far easier to defeat the Brotherhood by cutting off their source of power rather than beating them in battle. She picked up a piece of crimson Rakshi armor and called on the power of her mask. This time she saw a place she did not recognize. Makuta Kirox was there, and a silvery pool, but not just any pool. No, this one had a figure emerging from it, a being actually made of energized protodermis. She concentrated hard, and the location came to her, an island just north of the one her newest ally came from. Helrix dropped the piece of armor and turned to Kitungu. The Rahi had reluctantly agreed to break off his efforts to save the victims of Visarak long enough to help in the war. In return, Helrix had promised him that Visarak would never again be a threat to anyone else. "We have to go," she said. "There's another source." It was a short journey. Their destination at first seemed uninhabited, but that illusion didn't last long. Helrix spotted things skulking among the rocks. They weren't Matoran or Rahi, but looked like something in between. The overall feeling was that something was very wrong here. The air, the ground, the inhabitants all felt off somehow, in a way that obviously made Kitungu uneasy. There were no buildings on the island, none left standing anyway. The most prominent feature was a large cave. Helrix and Kitungu entered cautiously. The passage narrowed considerably once they were a little ways in, forcing them to crawl to make any forward progress. Helrix couldn't help but think how easy it would be to get trapped in here. As the passage widened again, Helrix saw more creatures. These obviously were Rahi beasts, but not like anything she had seen before. They were short, pale bipeds with large yellow eyes and spindly arms and legs. They backed away and moved to the side as she and her ally passed, but as soon as the two had moved on, they assembled into a group and followed close behind. Helrix and Kitungu came to a huge chamber. In the center of it was not a pool of energized protodermis, but an actual lake of the stuff. And rising from the center was the figure of a living being, a head, 2 arms, a torso, ending in the lake itself. Its features were barely there, and its substance was the silver color of energized protodermis. The sight triggered a memory. An agent on Metronui had reported that Taragavakama had once mentioned an energized protodermis entity his team had fought when they were Toa Metro. Could this be the same being? "I have been expecting you," said the figure. "I have felt your kind at work in my pools throughout this universe. Destructive, but ultimately futile. Cap one source of my substance and it will emerge somewhere else." "Then we will destroy it there too," Helrix answered. "What are you?" "I am creation and destruction," the entity answered. "I am the power to transform and to destroy. I am every drop of energized protodermis that exists, and every drop is me. I am as far beyond you, creature of armor and tissue, as you are beyond an insect." "And your purpose here?" asked Helrix. "I did not choose to come here," the entity replied. "I lived in the core of a planet until one day a portion of my substance forced its way to the surface. It did not take long for the inhabitants of that world to discover my power, or to begin warring over it. But some of what makes up my form was taken and placed inside this universe, and so escaped before Cataclysm overtook that world." "And now?" said Helrix. "Now I experiment on the creatures and things I find around me," said the entity. "I have even let others make use of my power if I found their intentions intriguing enough." You have helped create beings that have brought terror and death to thousands, said Helrix. It has to stop. Is a weapon responsible for the actions of the one who wields it? Asked the entity. Perhaps not, said Helrix, but a weapon can be broken and so never used again. A soft sound that might have been laughter escaped from the entity. I have met your kind before, so confident in your power to contain me, control me, or destroy me. You are no more than stone apes reaching for the stars, believing you could extinguish them if only you could get them in your grasp. The lake began to boil and churn. A huge wave of energized protodermis rose up behind the entity, so wide it spanned the whole chamber, and began to speed across the surface toward Helrix and Kitungu. Transformation or destruction, said the entity. Which will be your fate? Let us find out together. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 8. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. A tidal wave of energized protodermis was headed right for Toa, Helrix, and Kitungu. When it struck them, it would do one of two things: transform them forever into who knew what, or destroy them both. Desperate, Helrix reached out with her elemental power. Despite many thousands of years of honing her control over water to perfection, it did no good. Energized protodermis, though in liquid form, was not water, and was immune to her abilities. Doom was coming in a great silver wave. Kitungu growled. Helrix glanced at him to see that his attention was directed behind them. Specifically, he was looking at a hole in space that had just opened. Thoughts raced through Helrix's mind. Had Brutaka come to save them? Where did this portal lead? But there wasn't time for answers, only escape. Grabbing Kitungu's wrist, she pulled him toward the hole. They dove in together with no idea of where they would emerge. At the same moment, a figure appeared in the portal. He stepped out into the chamber. If anyone had been present to see, they might have recognized him as the mad criminal Vazon, his face hidden behind a Kanohi Olmec, the mask of dimensional gates. And if they peered closely, they might have seen his eyes widen at the sight of a wall of energized protodermis coming right at him. "Uh-oh," he said. Turaga Vakama walked slowly through the corridors of the Colosseum. It had been his workplace since his return to the city of Metronui. Now it was his home as well, along with that of all the other Turaga. Much had changed in the city in recent days, not all of it good. Despite his confinement, he had been able to pick up snatches of information here and there. The fortunes of war had evidently turned against the Brotherhood of Makuta. Numerous Makuta-held islands had fallen, including, rumor had it, Destral itself. It was almost too much to hope for. Perhaps the Great Spirit would awaken to find his arch-enemies vanquished for good. He passed his chamber and headed down a flight of stairs to a secure room. Here were kept weapons, memorials to the Toa Mangai, and one very important Kanohi mask. Although Vakama knew that it was one of the safest spots in the city, he still checked on it every day. If the contents of that room were to fall into the wrong hands, he didn't even want to think about it. He was halfway down the stairs when he heard the crash. He raced down to find a half-dozen heavily armed Tamatorans scattered like leaves in a windstorm. The door to the chamber had crumpled with age, and stepping through it was a being Vakama had hoped never to see again. A little over 1,000 years ago, when he was still a Toa, Vakama had battled a being called Voparak. Surrounded by a field that aged anything it touched, Voparak seemed impossible to beat, and it took a Makuta to do it in the end. Voparak worked for the Dark Hunters and sought one thing in Metronui, the thing he now held in his great claw, the Kanohi Mask of Time. Vakama froze. He wanted to attack, to avenge his fallen friends, but he knew that no attack of his would stop this creature. Voparak knew it too. He looked at Vakama with something like contempt. Then he shrugged and turned his back on the Turaga, walking away. Vakama followed. A few minutes later, he watched Voparak walk out of a hole in the side of the Colosseum. A four-armed warrior wielding a multi-bladed axe bellowed at the sight of the thief and charged. Voparak reached out and grabbed his attacker. In a matter of seconds, the warrior aged tens of thousands of years before collapsing on the ground. Voparak kept going, and there was nothing, Vakama knew, that could hope to stop him. Kalma moved warily through the main factory complex of Zia, flanked by Mantax and Alek. He did not want to be here. It would have been far more satisfying to be leading his new fleet against the Brotherhood of Makuta. But Prydak had contacted him and assured him that their old dream of overthrowing a great spirit might live again. Up ahead, sitting on a makeshift throne, was the Shadowed One, leader of the Dark Hunters. He eyed the three Baraki coldly. Perched on the rafters above was Darkness, who watched over the Shadowed One, though not out of any desire to guard him. No, Darkness waited for a sign of weakness in the leader, to kill him so another could take his place. Shadowed One, we bring you greetings from Prydac, said Kalma, and congratulate you on your seizure of this island. The Shadowed One simply nodded, his gaze never leaving Kalma's hideous face. It is Prydac's belief that the Baraki and the Dark Hunters would be well served by an alliance, Kalma continued. After this chaos has ended, someone will need to pick up the pieces of this universe. We see an opportunity. And what do you have to bargain with besides your fearsome reputations? The Shadowed One said, mockery in his voice. Kalma simply smiled. Information. We know that Makuta Teradak struck the Great Spirit Motunui down, and we know how. We also know that a prototype of the virus used to do it was hidden on this island, and we believe you have it. I, said the Shadowed One, I am a humble administrator of Zia, a mere servant of the people, nothing more. Kalma laughed. You are a lying, treacherous sack of doom, Viper Breath, but you are also very thorough. Oh, yes, we've heard all about you and your organization since our release from captivity. If that virus is on Zia, you have it. The Shadowed One's expression darkened. A lesser being would have quaked with fear at the sight. The Baraki, though, were not lesser beings. And if I do? You know where it is. We know how it can be used. And so, a bargain. The Shadowed One considered. He could just kill these three as he had agent, but if they really did know something about how the vials he found could be turned against the Great Spirit, well, that was knowledge worth gaining. He could always kill them later, after all. On one condition, he said. Prydac and I will meet on neutral ground, the land of Korzani. If I am satisfied with what he has to offer, then, perhaps, Dark Hunter and Baraki will walk side by side into a new dawn. To be continued. Destiny War, Chapter 9. It took the Mari a long time to make it from Ardedax back to Metronui, and Jawa's first thought upon arriving was that it had been way too long. Metronui was under attack. At first he thought that was Metronui. It was surrounded by high walls with weapons mounted atop them, weapons belching fire and smoke at the attackers. The walls were manned by warriors of all sorts, none of which Jawa recognized. Wait, check that. The Berserker battling three opponents at once looked a lot like Huki. What's going on, said Nuperu. It looks like we've walked into a full-scale war. It's been going on for a while, said Holly, but I think it's come home. It was an awesome sight. Ships flying the banner of the Brotherhood of Makuta ringed the island city. Flying Rakshi were assaulting from every direction, firing bolts of energy from their staffs, while others pounded on the walls. In one section, a portion of the wall had already crumbled, and warriors fought in the gap, trying to keep the invaders out. They're breaking through, shouted Nuperu. Let's go, said Jawa. We stand or fall with our city. The three Toa hit the gap from behind, using fire, water, and earth to tear through the ranks of Rakshi. They made it through the wall of the city. Beyond the ranks of Order of Motunui agents, they spotted the Turaga manning barricades. Jawa rushed up to Vakama. Turaga, what's happening? How did this battle begin? We can thank the Order for that, Vakama replied. Now our problem is how to end it before the city is destroyed. The Mask of Time, said Holly. Can one of us use it to, slow down the Rakshi somehow? I wish you could, said Vakama, but the mask is gone, stolen by a Dark Hunter. He made the gap in the wall you came through. Jawa looked around. In his days as captain of the Takoro Guard, he had learned a thing or two about battle strategy. A quick glance was enough to tell him that the Order had badly underestimated the ferocity of the Makuta attack. The Rakshi had already gained the tops of the walls in 3 or 4 places, and in one southern section had made it inside the walls as well. As he watched, the defenders of the gap fell back, and the invaders began pouring through. We need an edge, said Jawa, something the Rakshi wouldn't expect. There are more Toa coming, but they won't get here in time, said Vakama. But there might be one Toa here now who could help us. Listen well. It was Holly who found the Toa in question, a Toa of Sonic's named Krakua. When he heard Vakama's plan, he looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Let me get this straight, he said while blasting Rakshi with sonic beams. Vakama wants me to cycle through multiple frequencies until I find that one that will awaken something called the Borok? Yes, said Holly. We know, we suspect the signal that awakens them is sonic, but we don't know what it is or how to trigger it. If we can awaken the ones under Metronui, and if the Rakshi try to get in their way, Well, it might buy us some time for something else we're planning. All right, I'll try, said Krakoa. No promises. Holly left. Her next move was to be using her power to stir up the ocean to try to wreck the Makuta ships. But before she could do so, everything changed all around her. The stars brightened overhead. The breeze turned warm. The earth shook in a gentle tremor. She didn't know how, but somehow she was certain the Great Spirit had awakened. Beyond the city walls, a storm rose, tossing the Makuta fleet about like toys. Yet that did nothing to deter the Rakshi, who kept on coming. They had broken through the walls in 4 places and were rampaging through Ta-Metru. Nothing could stop them, it seemed. At least until the ground erupted in front of them, and a horde of Borak emerged. It was not a large number, only those specimens that were asleep in the archives and the small nest below it. But it was enough. The Rakshi attacked immediately, and the Borak responded. The 2 sides were locked in combat, and as they fought, the Mari and the Order agents picked off Rakshi at will. The battle seesawed back and forth, with the Rakshi never realizing that all the Borak wanted was to get to the island of Motunui. Had the Rakshi just gotten out of their way, the fight would have been over. The city suddenly shook from a series of explosions. An Order agent atop the wall yelled, "Flyers incoming!" Holly looked up to see 3 incredibly fast aircraft soar over the city, bank as one, and head back toward where the ships waited. One slowed and dipped its wings at her, and she recognized Pohatu in the pilot's seat. The Toanuva had come home. Pohatu flew his vessel back out of the city to finish off the ships. Meanwhile, Lua and Kapaka dove, peppering the Rakshi with blasts of light. The sight seemed to rally the city's defenders, who surged back toward the gaps in the walls. Led by Jala and Huki, they drove the Rakshi back. Finally, the storm was over. The Brotherhood ships had gone to the bottom of the Silver Sea. The walls around the city had been battered down, but the rubble was littered with dead Krata and shattered Rakshi armor. Those of the invaders that were intact had flown away, provided they could escape the blasters of the Jetrax, Rocco, and Axelara. Metra Nui was safe, and as the Toanuva confirmed, the Great Spirit had awakened. The power of the Brotherhood of Makuta was broken for all time. Turagaduma and Turagavakuma appeared side by side to announce that tomorrow would be a citywide day of celebration in the Colosseum. But Holly did not feel like celebrating, even now. She could not help but remember Motoro, who had given his life that Motunui might live. And despite all the wounded and the dying among the defenders, she could not help but feel it had all been a little too easy. True, there had been some unexpected help, the airships, the Borak, the storm, but they had faced an army of Rakshi. Something told her they should not have won, at least not with so much of the city still intact. She smiled. Turaga no Kama would have chided her for worrying so much. No matter how things seemed, the Great Spirit was awake for the first time in over 1,000 years. Light had triumphed over darkness, hadn't it? The Toa had achieved their destiny and saved the universe, hadn't they? And that meant all was well again. Nothing very bad could happen now, could it? Holly turned to head for Ga-Metru, humming a song Nokama had once taught her, one written long ago that spoke of hope for tomorrow. Perhaps, if not for the music, she might have heard the sound of dark laughter on the wind. To be continued in Reign of Shadows. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 1. Tardak blinked the sweat out of his eyes. Times like this, he wished he didn't have to work in full helmeted armor. But even here, so close to the free city of Atero, it was a little too dangerous to be out in the desert on your own and unprotected. His task here was routine. Along with the Gori from various villages, Kiri, Crotetius, Skidonius, and Kerbold, he was in Atero to help prepare the arena for the coming tournament. Even with care throughout the year, there was always a need to do minor repairs before Glatorian from all over descended on the place. Of course, Tardak hadn't kept at that work for very long, not when there were ruins not far away that he could explore. Making an excuse about getting some supplies from his wagon, he had slipped out of the city and found a likely spot to dig. It was hard work and hot work. He could have used a helper, but that wasn't doable. Kiri was much too dedicated to the work in Atero. Kerbold just wanted to get done and get back to Equinox. Skidonius was kind of a creep, and Crotetius he barely knew. No, he decided, he digs best who digs alone. His tool hit something, buried about 4 feet down in the sand. Fishing it out, he found it was a square of metal, about twice the size of his hand and obviously broken off something larger. Inscribed on it was a circle, with a much smaller circle inside and at the bottom of it. Tardak frowned. He had run across things like this before, with similar symbols. He had no idea what they meant, and neither did anyone else, so far as he knew. If they were a language, what language, and spoken by whom? It was frustrating, because he had not found enough samples to even begin trying to decipher the symbols. He turned the piece of metal over, hoping there would be another symbol on the back. Instead, he found something quite different. A map had been scratched into the metal. Some of the places on it he recognized, some he did not. At the bottom of the map was a mountain chain that looked a great deal like the Black Spike Mountains to the north. The features drawn just below the mountains seemed to bear out that it was the same range. Most of the map was areas north of the mountains, though, a region he was not familiar with. All he really knew about it was that the scrawl were said to have come from there. At the top of the map, there were two more symbols, but different from the ones he had found before. One was just a mesh of interconnected lines, looking almost like a net or a web. The other was a star. What made that last interesting was that it was the only symbol that was colored. The star was red. A red star, thought Tardak. Who ever heard of such a thing? It was certainly fascinating, but impossible to investigate, at least on his own. By traveling northwest, he could skirt the Black Spikes and reach the northern region, but the map indicated raging rivers and other natural hazards along the way. Going up there without aid would be beyond dangerous, and no Glatorian would hire out for the job this close to the Atero tournament. Hey! Tardak turned. Crotetius was walking over, looking annoyed. Are you going to help or play in the sand? What's that you have? Tardak showed the Volcanisagori what he had found. Crotetius didn't bother to take it. Just looked at both sides and then shrugged. So what? It's a piece of junk. Maybe you could use it to patch your wagon, but other than that... What a Vorox, muttered Tardak to himself. Aloud he said, You're probably right. I mean, that red star, what's that all about? After all, everyone knows there's nothing valuable up that way. No hidden treasure, no obsidian, no water stones, nothing. This, of course, was a tremendous lie, and Tardak knew Crotetius would never believe it. In fact, he was counting on that. Rumors flew faster than grains of sand in a sandstorm about what might be to the north. In Equinox, they said the mountains were covered with valuable obsidian. In Volcanus, they said there were entire valleys of water stones, those valuable rocks that could be split open to reveal pure water inside. As for Tejon, well, they were pretty imaginative there, and the Agori of Tessara just didn't want to even talk about it. Now Crotetius reached out to take the piece of metal and get a closer look. You know, if you like, I could take this scrap metal off your hands. Maybe you'd like to trade? Later on, Tardak would be unable to explain just why he said what he did. Maybe after years of digging in the sand and finding pieces of a puzzle but no way to solve it, he had just had enough. If he didn't take a chance, he would never find any answers. Sure, I'll trade you, he said. You can have the piece of metal, if you go with me to find that red star, whatever it is. Go up there? Are you crazy? Said Crotetius. That's the offer, Tardak said firmly. We have enough time before the tournament starts to get there and get back. He actually wasn't sure that was true, but wasn't going to tell Crotetius that. Think about it, he continued. What if there's something really valuable up there? Something that changes everyone's life in Barra Magna? Well, I mean, you'll be a hero. Crotetius smiled. As a vehicle pilot in the arena, he was just one more Agori fighter in a world dominated by Glatorian. But if he did something truly great, well, Ranu wouldn't live forever. Maybe he could lead Volcanus someday. Okay, Tardak, Crotetius said, I guess you can join my expedition. But we're going to need more help. See if you can recruit a few more Agori without telling them about the star. And we leave at dawn. Tardak walked away, a grin spreading across his face. Sure, he hadn't been completely honest, but sometimes you had to take shortcuts in the pursuit of knowledge, right? Little did Tardak know that shortcut was about to lead him right into a nightmare. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 2. In the end, only Kerbold was willing to come along with Crotetius and Tardak in search of the Red Star. Scudonia said it was crazy to go off on some wild rock steed chase so close to the date of the tournament, and Kiri was in a hurry to get back to Volcanus. Cortesia suggested they take vehicles north, but Tarduk vetoed that suggestion. "Vehicles can't go where we're going, even tracked ones," said Tarduk. "Plus they make noise, and noise attracts bone hunters. No, we'll use sandstalkers." It took a certain amount of wheeling and dealing to borrow 3 of the beasts from an Equinox trader, especially since Tarduk wouldn't say where they were going with them. But within a short time, the 3 Agori were mounted and ready to start their expedition. The shortest route would be to go east of the Dark Falls and then north toward the volcanic region above the Black Spike Mountains. But the presence of Skrull, Voroks, and bone hunters up that way made it also the most dangerous. So Tarduk led the small party northwest, past the village of Tessara and Elbow Peak, and into the White Quartz Mountains. Kerbold, being a native of Equinox, knew this region fairly well. There were paths that traders took through the peaks in search of anything of value they could sell. It was cold here, even worse than the desert by night. More than once the sandstalkers almost lost their footing on the smooth face of the crystalline rock. Although it made all 3 Agori nervous, they had to travel by day. It would be too easy to stray off the path in the dark and possibly tumble right off a cliff. After 2 days, they had moved far enough north that they were in completely unfamiliar territory. Whatever creatures lived in this region would never have been in the desert to the south, since they obviously thrived on cold. Cortesius was on constant alert. That was why he was the first to notice that they were being stalked. "Should we stop?" asked Tarduk. "No," snapped Cortesius. "That's the worst thing we can do. We need to go faster. Maybe we can lose them." Tarduk doubted it. He had spotted one of their pursuers. It looked a little like one of the wasteland wolves that live in the desert. Their paws had evolved to be able to traverse across the loosest sand, and they were highly effective trackers. But, Tarduk reminded himself, though it looked like one, their stalker wasn't one of those creatures. For one thing, this beast was half made of metal. Tarduk had never seen anything like it. "How many?" asked Kerbold. "More than one," answered Cortesius. 6 or 8, maybe. They're hard to spot." Tarduk wasn't sure how anything could move through the White Quartz Mountains unseen like this. As the day wore on, that became the least of his worries. No matter how fast the party moved, the wolves kept on their trail. No matter what trick they tried to evade pursuit, sending one sandstalker off in another direction, doubling back on their own trail, even leaving some of the precious supply of food on the trail to distract the pack, the wolves kept coming. "What are those things?" Tarduk asked for the 3rd time. Now they had to ride through the night, like it or not. Kerbold shared Tarduk's mount, and Cortesius led the way. Although it probably wouldn't matter anyway, Cortesius refused to light a torch, fearing the wolves would see the light. Tarduk argued that they were probably tracking by scent, but it did no good. They wound up on a narrow, winding trail. On the right side was the face of the mountain. On the left, a sheer drop into darkness. The good news was that there was no place for the wolves to hide here. They would have to follow the trail as well, or give up, it seemed. The bad news was that even the sandstalkers were having a hard time finding their footing. One slip, and someone wouldn't be coming back from this trip. Moving as quickly as they dared, the 3 Agori made their way down the trail. Once, the mount carrying Kerbold and Tarduk stumbled, and one pack of tools fell off and into the abyss. The sound of it striking bottom never came. Kerbold looked back. In the bright light of the moons, he could see no sign of their pursuers. "I think we lost them. Do you think we lost them?" Tarduk glanced over his shoulder. He didn't see anything either, but said, "No, I don't think we lost them." "Neither do I," agreed Kerbold. The trail began to widen, becoming more of a plateau. Dawn was breaking, the first rays of light reflecting off the quartz peaks. Cortesius reined his sandstalker to a stop, and Tarduk did the same. They looked behind. There was no sign of the half-dozen fur and metal-covered wolves that had been following them. "Maybe they didn't make it across the trail," said Cortesius, "or they found easier prey. Either way, I'm glad they're gone." There's one other possibility," suggested Tarduk. "They stopped following because they knew they didn't need to anymore." Cortesius turned at the sound of a low growl, a hollow metallic sound that echoed throughout the mountains. Lined up on a ridge ahead were not 6 of the wolves, but 60. They had evaded a hunting pack, only to ride right into the den. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Part 3. The 3 Agori sat on their mounts, frozen with fear. Before them stood dozens of wolves, their bodies a weird mixture of muscle and fur and dull metal. Their eyes were gleaming points of savage light in the darkness. Tarda could smell their musky odor mixed with the scent of cold iron. "Watch out," whispered Crotesius. "They'll try to circle around us so we're surrounded. Then they'll attack." "Thanks for the nature lesson," Kerbold answered. "How do we get out of this?" "Ride through them," suggested Tardak. "Maybe we can, outrun them." Crotesius patted the flank of his sandstalker. "I don't think these animals are going a step closer to those things if they can help it." Tardak wished he could come up with another idea. Going forward was out. Going backward meant trying to race across a narrow trail with a pack of wolves at their heels. If they didn't fall into a bottomless abyss, they would have the fun of being eaten. He couldn't believe their journey was coming to an end so soon and in such a horrible way. Crotesius was the first to spot a new arrival. Someone was coming up behind the wolf pack. The figure was bent and twisted and walked with a bad limp. He carried a staff in his left hand and seemed to be relying on it to stay upright. Even with the moonlight, it was impossible to see the armored being clearly. But then he spoke. "Down." It was a simple word, but delivered in a voice that sounded to Tardak like the limbs of dead trees scraping against a shelter. To the amazement of the three Agori, the wolves crouched down against the frozen ground. The figure started hobbling forward, moving unmolested through the wolves. All Tardak could think of was Malum, who, rumor had it, now lived among the bestial Voroks. But it wasn't Malum coming toward them. Tardak heard Kerbold grasp in recognition. The Agori from the ice village of Equinox said, "Sorel, but you're—" "Dead," the crippled warrior said. "Close to it, perhaps, but still among the living. Lost in the chaos of war was I, and left behind, bent and broken when the fighting moved on. And here I have been ever since." It was too much for Crotesius to take in. "You've been living in these mountains with these things?" "You are of the fire people," Sorel said, as if seeing the Agori's red armor for the first time. "So you wouldn't know about the Iron Wolves, one of the great being's more efficient creations. I trained this pack, led them into battle, and when the world shattered, they stayed by my side. It was the wolves who brought me food and protected me from harm, and there were many in these mountains who would have done me harm." Sorel reached down and petted one of the wolves, brushing his hand across fur and metal. "Maybe you have forgotten, or you never knew how things were before. Armies marching across the deserts, the jungles, the mountains, battling to claim the energy in the core of the world. The element lords led us into war, and when their actions destroyed the planet, they were trapped. Yes, they were trapped." Tardak shivered. Was it getting colder, or was it fear that made him trouble? It would have been easy to blame the presence of Sorel and his pets, but no, it was getting colder. The wind was picking up, and snow had begun to fall, lightly at first, then more heavily. Soon he could barely make out the aged warrior and his wolves through the storm. "Wait a minute," said Kerbold. "I remember the war. I remember how it ended, and I remember the element lords. But you said were trapped?" Sorel nodded his head, a painful exercise due to his injuries. "I do not know why you have come here, but I tell you now to turn back. The element lords walk this planet once more, and the fortunate among you will die first." A roar filled Tardak's ears. He looked toward the source of the sound. A massive wall of white was surging down the mountain, an avalanche of snow from which there could be no hope of escape. And standing atop the mountain, watching his doom rush down toward the Agori, stood a warrior made of ice. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 4. Tardak closed his eyes tight. A massive avalanche of ice and snow was roaring down the mountainside toward him and his allies. There was no way to outrun it or evade it. He and his two fellow Agori, Sorel and his Iron Wolves, were all doomed. And what he was sure would be his last few moments of life, he thought about all the artifacts he would never discover, all the mysteries he would never solve. Most of all, he thought about the map that had brought him north into the mountains, the one with the carving of a red star upon it. It would be easier to die if he could at least know the meaning of that symbol. There was a flash of light, so bright he could see it through his eyelids, and a wave of almost unbearable heat. Tardak opened his eyes to see the mountainside ablaze, the flames so intense they melted the snow to water and turned the water to steam in an instant. The Iron Wolves growled and backed away, Sorel going with them. The two sandstalkers the Agori rode reared up in panic, and it took all of the riders' skill to keep them from bolting. Tardak peered through the flames to try and see the ice warrior he had spotted before atop the peak. Yes, the crystalline figure was still there, his body language speaking of unbridled rage. "We need to get out of here, now," Tardak said. "What convinced you?" asked Kerbald. "The avalanche or the firestorm?" "The possibility of meeting the cause of either one," Tardak replied. This time there was no need to worry about riding into the midst of the iron wolves. The fire had driven them all away. Sorel, however, had lingered in the area. As they rode up into a pass, he emerged from behind a rock and hailed them. "Go back," Sorel implored. "There is nothing for you beyond here. Go back to the safety of your homes." Crotetius laughed bitterly. "You obviously haven't been to one of our homes lately." "That jet of flames," said Tardak, "that wasn't natural, was it? That was the element lord of fire who saved us." Now it was Sorel's turn to laugh. "Saved you? You are dust to him, not even dust. That was an attack on his frozen enemy. You were simply caught between them." "Wait a minute," Crotetius interrupted. "I remember the element lords, and their armies, and the war, but the war ended more than 100,000 years ago." Sorel shook his head. "It ended for you, for their soldiers, and it ended for Spherus Magna, as all things did in that one horrible moment. But for the element lords, the struggle goes on." Tardak glanced behind. He saw no sign of anyone following them, and so thought it safe to continue. "A struggle over what?" he asked. "The core war was fought over energies from the heart of the planet. But the planet no longer exists. What is there left to fight over?" Sorel said nothing, simply raised a withered arm and pointed toward the north. Tardak felt a chill run up his spine. He didn't bother trying to convince himself it was just from the cold. He dug into his pack and produced the fragment with the map. Sorel glanced down at it. Tardak heard a sharp intake of breath. "The Red Star," he muttered. "The Valley of the Maze." He looked at each Agori in turn. "You seek the same secrets as the element lords, and you risk the same fate. The heart of the maze holds the last riddle of the great beings. Many have entered the valley in hopes of solving the puzzle. None have ever emerged again." "Let me guess," said Crotetius. "You think we should turn back." Sorel shrugged, not easy to do with a body so badly twisted. "I think the Red Star burns in your eyes and in your heart as it has for so many before you. I think you will go on, no matter what warnings I give you. And I know you will die." Tardak glanced at Crotetius and Kerbald. Neither looked afraid, or maybe they were just hiding it well, and he knew Sorel was right. He had to discover the secrets hinted at on this map, even if it meant riding into danger. "You're right," Tardak said. "We will go on. Can you help us? Tell us anything about what's up ahead?" Sorel was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, "We live in a broken world, Agori, and in such a place nothing stays whole and untouched. The stream of life gets diverted, dammed up, misdirected, and even," he said, glancing down at his own ruined body, "distorted beyond all imagining. What awaits you to the north? A realm of lies. A place where beauty hides a rotten heart, where trees provide no shelter, the air no cooling breeze, and where water does not quench your thirst. And the moment you believe what you see or hear, touch or taste, it will be too late for you." "Stop speaking in riddles," snapped Crotetius. "If you have nothing useful to say, get out of our way." In a flash, Sorel drew a dagger and had it at Crotetius' throat. Tardak could not recall ever seeing even a prime Glatorian move that fast. "I could kill you now and spare you the horrors to come," said Sorel, eyes blazing. "But you don't deserve such mercy. Ride on, Agori. Beyond this pass is the Forest of Blades. All who travel through become one with nature, and beyond that the oh-so-welcoming waters of the River Dormus. And if you survive, the maze waits for you." To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 5. Tardak, Crotetius, and Kerbald had been riding for a full day. They had left Sorel, his iron wolves, and his dire warnings behind, but none could forget his words. Kerbald had been silent since then, lost in his own thoughts. Tardak was more watchful than ever, hoping to spot the next attack before it was too late. For his part, Cretizius had decided that Sorel had gone mad after so many years in the mountains, and there was little point in paying attention to the ravings of a madman. Tardik paused to glance at the metal fragment he carried with the strange map inscribed upon it. Yes, they were almost far enough to the north. Soon it would be time to turn east and head for where the symbol of the red star was located on the crude chart. Kerbold abruptly reined the Sandstalker to a halt. "I've changed my mind. I want to turn back," he said. "We're not turning back," Cretizius answered without turning around. "I don't even know what we're doing here," snapped Kerbold. "Who cares what's beyond the mountains? We have our own problems at home." "Maybe the two are connected," offered Tardik. "Maybe there's something up here that can help us deal with the Bone Hunters, the Voroks, and the Skrull." "We're here for a weapon?" Kerbold asked. "If there was something that powerful up north, the Elders would have sent Clitorian to get it." "Maybe they didn't want something like that in the hands of Strack," muttered Cretizius, "or Kina, for that matter." "Shut up," said Tardik. "Hey, I have a right to say what I think," replied Cretizius. "No, I mean shut up. I think I hear something up ahead," Tardik said. All three went silent. Now they could all hear it. A harsh, keening sound like the song sung by a chorus of the dead. It seemed to be coming from a forest in the distance. "It's the wind," said Cretizius. "You know, big blast of hot air, enough to knock a person over. Sort of like Skidonius after a win in the arena." "I know it's the wind," answered Tardik. "I just never heard wind like that before." "The Forest of Blades," said Kerbold. "Up ahead. Maybe that's the place Sorel was talking about." "I don't see any blades," said Cretizius. "I see trees. That means maybe there's some fruit or something else we can eat. I'm hungry enough to eat Thornax stew at this point, even cold Thornax stew." Tardik started to say something back, but even the thought of cold Thornax stew was so nauseating that he had to swallow hard to keep from getting sick. Cretizius had spurred his Sandstalker on and was riding ahead. Kerbold hesitated for a long moment before following. Sitting on the animal right behind Kerbold, Tardik felt a moment of relief. He didn't want to lose a team member, and he doubted Kerbold would be able to make it back to Eikonox safely on his own. They needed to stick together. As the small band rode closer, they noticed something strange. Faint sunlight was glittering off what appeared to be swords sticking out of trees. It almost looked as if the forest was armed, as strange as that seemed. "Must be a weird kind of tree to grow branches like that," said Kerbold. "I guess we know how the place got its name." "Do we?" said Tardik. "Look closer." Kerbold peered through the morning mist. What he had thought was just a gleaming branch was, in fact, a sword, and it wasn't sticking out of the wood. It was held in the hand of a warrior trapped halfway inside the trunk of the tree. Kerbold gasped. He suddenly realized that there were scores of warriors here, their bodies merged with the wood of the forest, still clutching their weapons. It was as if the trees had reached out and grabbed them and wouldn't let go. He couldn't tell if the warriors were still alive or not. "That's horrible," he said. "What do you think?" Tardik asked Cretizius. The Fire Agori just stared at the awful forest for a long time. Then he said, "No natural forest behaves this way. I hate to say it, but Sorel was right. The Element Lords were here. This is power over plant life at work. These warriors might have been here since the war, for all we know." "If they're alive, we have to save them," said Tardik. "That means going in there," replied Cretizius. Tardik nodded. Kerbold yanked on the reins, turning the Sandstalker around. "You can get off right here, Tardik," said Kerbold. "I'm going back." Tardik knew he should argue with him, but he couldn't think of a good argument. The sane thing to do was to head back to the desert and try to forget this terrible place existed. But something told him there was more at stake here than just the discovery of new knowledge or the solving of a puzzle. More and more he felt like they were on a mission, and a vital one. Without a word, Tardik jumped down from the Sandstalker. Then he climbed up onto Cretizius's mount. "Be careful, Kerbold. The way back might be more dangerous than the way here." Kerbold nodded toward the Forest of Blades. "Same to you, friend. I think you're crazy to go in there, but I'll make sure everyone back home knows you were trying to help others, and..." His voice broke and he stopped speaking. Tardik leaned over and shook his hand. In their hearts, both believed they would never see each other again. Tardik waited until Kerbold was well on his way before asking Cretizius to get the Sandstalker moving. Together they rode into the cool green shade of the forest. They were so close to the warriors that Tardik could have reached out and touched their armor, but he did not. He was doing his best to be brave, but he knew if one of the trapped warriors should suddenly move, he would have to scream. None of them did. The two Agori rode deep into the forest. It was silent. No birds sang here, no rodents scurried across the leaf-strewn floor in search of a meal. It was a garden of sorts, but it was not a place of life. At least that was how it seemed to Tardik and Crotetius, right up until the moment when the wind gusted again, the howling noise rose, and the branches all around reached out to seize them both. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 6. Before they could react, Crotetius and Tardik had been yanked from their sandstalker. The forest around them had come to life, branches reaching out to grab them, and vines knotting themselves around the two Agori. In a matter of moments, they were tied to trees. Crotetius looked around at the countless warriors whose bodies were merged with the wood of the forest, and wondered if that would be his fate, too. "I've got a little knife I use in my digging," said Tardik. "Maybe I can cut the vines and get free." With some effort, Tardik got his hands on the blade and sliced deep into one of the vines. The plant reacted instantly, wrapping one of its tendrils around his neck and squeezing until he was sure he would black out. It wasn't until he dropped the knife that the pressure eased. "I guess they don't want us to leave," he said. Not far away, a mini cyclone whipped leaves into the air. More and more plant matter was drawn into its wake until an entire segment of the glade was filled with leaves, vines, and branches, spinning furiously in the grip of a tornado. Then a being emerged from out of the storm itself. At first glance, Tardik thought he might have been made of plants. He was tall and green, with thorns jutting out from his arms and legs and intertwined roots crisscrossing his chest. His eyes were an emerald so dark they were almost black. His arms were long, with thick vines wrapped around them, and more thorns served as his claws. Even his sword looked like it was a green and growing thing, though sharp and deadly. It was only when he took a closer look that Tardik began to have doubts. Perhaps this being was a living plant creature, or perhaps it was simply armor that made him seem that way. Regardless, Tardik had no doubt who he was. The Element Lord of Jungle, Master of the Green. The newcomer looked at Tardik, then at Crotetius. Then he gave a gentle shrug, which sounded like the snapping of twigs underfoot. "You don't know the way," the Element Lord said. "You are of no use to me." Tardik was going to ask just what it was he was talking about, but Crotetius spoke first. "How do you know we don't know the way? Why do you think we're here?" "What are you doing?" thought Tardik. The Element Lord walked up to Crotetius and scraped a thorny nail across the Agori's helmet. "You're fire," he said. "Fire only knows how to destroy. I have seen fire try to penetrate the maze and fail, time after time." He turned to Tardik. "You came here by accident, but you are of the green, Agori, so I will let you go. Your companion must remain, however, and join my forest of blades." "I remember you," said Tardik. "Before the war, you led my people. You made things grow. You brought life. How can you just kill as if it means nothing?" The vines abruptly released Tardik, and he tumbled to the forest floor. When he looked up, the Element Lord's eyes were blazing at him. "Have you ever been to the deep forest, Agori?" he asked. "There the creatures live in perpetual darkness, because the roof of the woods is too thick to allow sunlight to pass through. Vines strangle the trees, leeching the life from them so they can take their place and capture whatever light they can find. Every living thing profits from the death of another." Tardik spotted a faint gleam of light in the distance beyond the Element Lord. He didn't know what it was, but if there was any chance it was help on the way, he had to keep talking. "What are you that you could do this?" he asked. "Once I was a warrior, like the ones held here," the Element Lord answered. "Then I and 5 of my brothers were chosen by the Great Beings for the honor of leading the villages of Spherus Magna. We were changed by their power, made one with our elements, and given armor and weapons to defend our people. We were no longer like Agori or anyone else. We became nature itself, as benevolent, giving, ruthless, and indifferent as that can mean. The Element Lord's eyes suddenly went wide. He let out a ragged scream and whirled around enraged. Behind him, Kerbold had appeared, carrying a torch. He had lit the vines that bound Crotetius on fire, and the Agori was free again. But the Element Lord had felt the pain of his creations, and Tardik suddenly doubted very much any of the 3 villagers would make it out of here alive. "The torch!" Tardik yelled. "Throw the torch!" Kerbold hurled the flaming stick. It landed at the Element Lord's feet, among the leaves. Yellow-orange fire erupted, feeding off the plant matter all around. In seconds, the Element Lord was surrounded by a blaze burning out of control. "Run!" shouted Crotetius. The three Agori took off as fast as they could, dodging trees and leaping over rocks. Only Tardak looked back. The Element Lord was gone. Not dead, he was sure, simply vanished back into the forest. Possibly he was wounded, but more likely he was marshalling his power to stop the fire before it consumed the wood. Tardak saw trees and brushes and vines burning, also that he and his two friends could escape. And he wondered about the Element Lord's words, that every living thing profits from the death of another. Those words would echo in Tardak's mind for a very long time to come. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 7. Tardak, Crotetius, and Kerbold had left the woods well behind them, if not the memories of what had happened there. They had traveled in silence for the better part of the day. Tardak had not even bothered to ask Kerbold why he had come back. He was just grateful the Isagori had changed his mind. For much of the past several hours, the group had been riding along the banks of a river. Tardak had no doubt this was the river Dormus that Sorel had spoken about. It certainly did not seem dangerous in any way. It was a placid and calm body of water without even any rapids visible. That alone made Tardak a little nervous. His experience on Barra Magna was that anything that looked safe and welcoming usually wasn't either. At the same time, having spent much of his life in a desert, the sight of running water was an appealing one. Eventually they reached a point where the river had to be forded if they were going to keep on moving north. Tardak scouted until he found a spot that looked shallow enough. "We'll cross here," he said. "According to the map, we're not too far from where we're going." "That's a pretty old map," said Crotetius. "How do we know that red star thing is even still there? Or anything else? The Skrull probably stormed all through this area before they came to Barra Magna. I doubt they left much standing." "You just don't want to cross the river," joked Kerbold. "You fire types don't like to get wet, right?" Crotetius frowned. He walked right up to the edge of the water and turned around to face his two companions. "Right. I made it past the mechanical wolves and the hungry trees and everything else on this trip, and I'm scared of a stream. I'll cross it right now, and then—" There wasn't time to shout a warning. Behind Crotetius, a giant hand made of water sprang forth from the river. In the blink of an eye, it had seized the fire Agori and pulled him below the surface. Tardak and Kerbold rushed to the spot, heedless of their own potential danger. "Do you swim?" asked Tardak. "I'll manage," said Kerbold. "What's the plan?" "We go in after him," Tardak answered. "Let's go." The two Agori had taken 3 steps into the water when the hand appeared again. This time it grabbed both of them. The next moment they were being pulled down into the river. To Tardak's amazement, he wasn't drowning. Some air had been pulled down with them, and suddenly he had a bad feeling he knew why. "The Element Lord of Jungle wanted information from us," he remembered. "If this is the Element Lord of Water at work, maybe he wants the same thing, and we can't tell him anything if we're dead. But what happens when he finds out we have nothing to tell?" The water was dark and cold. Tardak focused on a pinpoint of light up ahead. As they rapidly drew closer, he could make out Crotetius suspended in the water inside an air bubble. Soon he and Kerbold were floating beside him. Before them, the underwater current began to twist and writhe. The waters reshaped themselves into the semblance of a face, easily as tall as one of the Agori. Its hollow voice came at them from every side. "Do you know the way?" it said. "One of your brothers already asked us," said Tardak. "You are the Element Lord of Water, right?" "I have that honor," the Element Lord answered. "And what did you tell my brother?" Tardak glanced at Crotetius. The fire Agori gave the slightest of nods, signaling that he would back whatever play Tardak wanted to make. As it turned out, Tardak didn't have to decide what to do next. Kerbold spoke up. "The same thing we'll tell you," said the Ice Agori. "Sure, we know the way. Would we have come this far out here if we didn't? But why should we tell you?" The Element Lord of Water paused, as if he was actually considering his answer. "Self-preservation," he said finally. This time it was Crotetius who answered. "Highly overrated. Better a dead hero than a live coward, I always say." This seemed to set the Element Lord back a bit. He and his kind weren't used to back-talk. Around the 3 Agori, the waters began to churn. "Do you know how it feels to drown, villager?" asked the Element Lord. "To feel your lungs fill up with water and your vision go black? I could make you feel that 1,000 times, and worse, never knowing when you will be allowed to finally die." "Sure you could," said Tardak, "but if you try, we'll make sure it goes that one step too far. Dead, we're of no use to you. dead we tell you nothing, and you'll never know the way. But maybe if you tell us why you're so desperate for the information, we could make a deal." The jungle Agori couldn't quite believe what he was saying. All this being had to do was increase the water pressure, and he could crush the three of them into paste. But after such a long journey and so many dangers, Tardik had had enough of riddles and threats. Whatever their reasons, the Element Lords were desperate for knowledge, and it was time to use that against them. "Why?" asked the Element Lord. "Because at the end of the way, there is power to be had. Power enough to end the war the only way it can end, with a victory for one of us." Tardik started to point out that the Core War had ended 100,000 years ago. Then he remembered something Sorel had said, how the war had ended for the Agori and the soldiers, but not for the Element Lords. Their hate still burned even in the depths of the water. "We can't tell you," said the jungle Agori. "It's too complicated. You know, if you make a wrong turn, well, that would be that. We would have to show you." Tardik held his breath. The jungle Element Lord had almost seemed able to read their thoughts. If this one could as well, they were doomed. But the Element Lord of Water did not attack or rage at them. Perhaps none of the Element Lords were able to read minds after all. Perhaps Jungle just assumed no Agori would be carrying this kind of knowledge. "Very well," said the Water Element Lord. "You will go forth, and the waters will go with you. You will show me the way, and in return—" The three Agori never got to hear what their captor was willing to trade. The temperature of the waters around them suddenly plummeted. Crotetius looked downriver, and his eyes widened. The water was freezing rapidly, and the effect was racing right toward them. The Element Lord of Water let out a yell of rage and frustration. Ice had found him again. Now his essence would have to flee the river or risk being frozen to death. Before the eyes of the Agori, the face in the water dissipated. Their captor had vanished, leaving them behind. "It's moving too fast," cried Kerbold. "We'll never make it to the surface in time." "I'm sorry," said Tardik. "I'm sorry." A few feet away, the river water turned to solid ice from the surface to the bottom. Any living thing unlucky enough to be in the waterway was frozen instantly. That was about to include three very brave Agori. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 8. The first thing Tardik noticed was that it was hot. Really hot. That made no sense. The last thing he remembered was being beneath the river Dormus, about to be frozen solid by rapidly advancing ice. The second thing he noticed was that his mouth was full of sand. He was face down in the stuff. That ruled out lying on the banks of the Dormus, since there was no sand there. With a little reluctance, he lifted his head. He was in the desert, surrounded by ruins. It looked like there had been some huge battle here not long ago. Tardik got to his feet and swayed, overcome by a wave of dizziness. When it passed, he started looking around. Right away, he saw Crotetius and Kerbold. Both were unconscious, but alive and apparently uninjured. Kerbold was lying next to a big chunk of stone, half buried in the sand. It had writing carved on it. Tardik cleared away the sand and read, "Atero Arena." "What?" thought Tardik. "It can't be. When we left to go north, the Atero Arena was whole. The tournament was about to start. What could have done this?" Tardik searched the ground frantically for some clue. He saw Glatorian armor and weapons scattered all around, obvious signs of a struggle, and one thing more, a scroll shield planted in the ground like a victory banner. That was it, then. The scroll had attacked Atero and destroyed it. And now, what? Were they attacking the villages? Or had they perhaps gone north to find the same place of power he had been seeking? He had to find out. Words rang in his head then. Someone, not long ago, had said to him, "Rock is already unyielding. Give it the power of the great beings to wield, and no world is safe." But who had said that, and where? He had a vague memory of an archway, a slab of stone, and someone speaking to him, and then he walked into the archway, and suddenly it all came back to him, a flood of memories surging into his brain. Yes, he had been underwater with Crotetius and Kerbold. They had been captives of the Element Lord of Water. Then the river began to turn to ice as the lord of that element attacked. The Water Lord had been forced to flee, and moments later the air bubbles that had kept the Agori alive vanished as well, but they would freeze long before they drowned. Desperately, the three started swimming for shore. Even as they did so, they could feel a disturbance in the water coming from upriver. Tardik turned and saw a huge black shape racing toward them underwater. As it got closer, he saw it was a massive slab of rock. He barely had time to register that before he was flying up and out of the water along with his two friends. Tardik landed hard on the muddy shore. He turned in time to see 3 pillars of rock retreating into the water. The next moment there was the sound of a great impact, and shards of ice flew up from beneath the river. The huge rock had smashed the oncoming wave of ice to bits. Tardik stood up. At first he thought he must have hit his head when he landed. Standing before him was a mirror image of himself made from rock. But when it spoke, it was not his voice, but the unmistakable tones of a scrawl. "Go back," said the duplicate Tardik. "You do not belong here. The maze is mine to conquer, not yours." "We're not looking to conquer anything," said Tardik. "We're just looking for answers. And some of us aren't even sure of the questions anymore," added Cretaceous. Tardik expected the rock thing to threaten them, or even attack. Instead it just nodded. "You have encountered many dangers coming here, have you not? You are missing your homes." Cretaceous and Tardik said nothing. Kerbal just nodded. "Then I will not delay your journey," said the Element Lord of Rock, for who else could it be? "But I will warn you, rock is already unyielding. Give it the power of the great beings, and no world is safe. That power will be mine and no one else's. Travel on, learn what you must, take nothing back with you, and never return." With that, the rock statue of Tardik crumbled to dust. "Maybe it is time to go home," said Cretaceous. "No, not after we've come so far," said Tardik. "We're close. I know it." The 3 Agori traveled along the bank of the river, keeping a watchful eye out for another Element Lord attack. A few hours later they had reached the headwaters. There before them was a massive archway decorated with ornate carvings. Written across the top in Agori were the words, "Spirit's Wish." Tardik was stunned at the sight. "I thought that was just a legend." "You've heard of this?" asked Cretaceous. "Read a carving once that referred to it," Tardik replied. "According to the story, anyone who passes through it gets the dearest wish of their spirit, or something like that. If it works, well, maybe we can get where we want to go right away instead of more traveling on foot. It's worth a try." "Doesn't look like we have any choice anyway," said Kerbal. "There's no way around it. We have to go through." Steeling themselves, the 3 Agori walked beneath the arch. There was a flash of light, a horrible, sickening feeling, and then utter and complete darkness. Until Tardik woke up in the sand. And now it made sense. The arch wasn't some magical wish-granter. It was a teleportation device, just the sort of thing the great beings would build. It was designed to scan the mind of anyone passing under and send them where they wanted to go. Or maybe where the great beings wanted them to go. There was no way to tell. "But why did I end up here?" wondered Tardik. "I wanted to go to the maze. I wanted answers. Or was the Element Lord of Rock right? Did I, somewhere deep down, really just want to go home? And so that's where it sent me." Cretaceous and Kerbal were on their feet now, looking around at the ruins of Atero in shock. Tardik knew that they would want to head back to their villages, and so did he. But once he was certain Tessera was all right, he was heading back north. He had to. This time he would make it through the arch and find what he was seeking. This time he wouldn't waver. Even if he had to go alone, he was making the journey. He had set out to solve a riddle, and it seemed some pretty powerful beings were trying to solve it too. It was still out there, tantalizing him, a question without an answer. But he would answer it somehow, and soon. Tardik looked to the north. His destiny lay that way, he knew, and nothing would stop him from achieving it. This is Greg Farshtey. Nothing will stop Tardik from achieving his destiny. He will reach the Valley of the Maze in 2010, along with someone you all know, as this Bionicle saga builds to its epic climax. For now, this part of the story has reached the end. Samad's Tale, Part 1. My name is Samad. It may be a name you've heard around the home fires of the Agori, or whispered by Glatorian as they stand watch. It's a name spoken with respect and with fear, and that is how it should be. History will tell you that I am a monster, a slaver, someone who made a living capturing my fellow Agori and selling them to the Skrull. I'd be a fool to lie and pretend I did not do those things. Of course I did. But there is more to the story than just that. And there is one thing you need to always remember about history. The winners write all the books. I am a member of the Iron Tribe. Not that you could tell by the color of my armor. That's intentional. Advertising that you are part of that tribe was, probably still is, an invitation to be ostracized, mobbed, even stoned. We're not welcome in the nice little villages of the other Agori, good enough to share their food and drink, clean enough to trade with. We're creatures for late-night tales told to new guards. Better stay sharp or some iron Agori will get you. It wasn't always this way, of course. A long, long time ago, well before the Core War or the Shattering, my tribe lived in the mountains of Boda Magna and worked the mines. We sent the iron we dug out of the rock to the Fire Tribe for forging, and in return they provided us with finished tools and weapons. We were rough and coarse, but we were honored for our hard work and treated like any other Agori. Iron Tribe members lived a life full of hard, honest work, and didn't ask for anything more. Outside of some arguments with our neighbors in the mountains, the Skrull, we didn't have any conflicts with anyone. When the end came, it came swiftly and quietly, like a dagger thrust to the back. A few miners working on the outskirts of our land began to act strangely. They were distracted, quarrelsome, and as days went by, they got worse. Asked if they felt sick, they said no. The only odd thing they could report was that their sleep had been disturbed, for they had stopped dreaming. Most of us laughed. After all, what mattered was the strength of our backs as we carved metal out of rock and hauled it to the surface. What did it matter if our sleep was just that, sleep, unmarred by illusions and fantasies? And if you can't dream, then you don't have to worry about nightmares, right? Wrong. If you can't dream, your waking life becomes the nightmare. The affected miners went from irritable to violent in short order, and from violent to mad. Dreams, it seems, are needed to release the bad energies that accumulate in all of us. Without them, the mind tears itself to shreds in time. Worse, what we now saw as a plague was spreading. More and more of my tribe lost the ability to dream. Those whose condition was far enough along would die raving lunatics. Those who were most recently infected were seized by horror and desperation, knowing the fate that awaited them. Some of us seemed to be immune. Myself, Tellurus, a handful of others. Naturally, our neighbors were curious about why we were still able to dream. None of us knew the answer. That didn't stop others in our tribe from talking about trying to find out, even if their efforts would mean our deaths. We banded together and hid in a cave, ready to defend ourselves against mad Agori who used to be our friends. As things got worse, our village leader appealed to other tribes for help. The Skrulls just laughed. The other tribes wouldn't even allow him to cross the border into their lands. No one wanted the little bit of iron we still dug up, believing somehow it might carry the disease. All trade came to a stop. When one of the still healthy Agori tried to join another tribe, he was driven off into the forest and killed by one of the beasts there. As far as we were concerned, he might just as well have been killed by the Agori who rejected him. Being a member of the Iron Tribe now carried a death sentence. If the plague didn't claim you, your one-time trading partners would. Tellurus came up with the idea of using minerals to change the color of our armor and helmets in the hope of passing as members of some previously unknown tribe and finding sanctuary. It was a stupid idea, but I went along with it. I don't need to tell you how well it worked. Still, we survived. We watched our tribe die off one by one until there were too few left in any condition to threaten us. We made our escape, but there was nowhere to go. Add to that, none of us were sure if one of the others might be a carrier of the plague, and you can see why we chose to go our separate ways. I headed south, not knowing Taurus was as well. I lived off what I could scrounge or steal. I saw the Core War erupt, and saw Agori killed by weapons made from iron my people had mined, and I laughed. When the shattering happened, I was in Baramagna. I had found a wagon and gained the loyalty of a spigot in the only way possible. I fed it. I didn't know what the future had in store for me, but I had transport, and I had hate. I would find a way to marry the two and gain my revenge. Tellurus took a different path. He started roaming the desert in a war machine based on the Scopio, acting like crushing a caravan or two would somehow make a difference. I made other plans. I would turn the other tribes Agori into commodities. I would sell them to the Skrull and leave them wishing they had died of the plague along with my friends. Much has changed in recent days. The Skrull have been driven from Roxas. 2 giant men made of metal are battling in the sky for reasons I cannot imagine. I have no doubt the end of the world is upon us. But before that happens, I have a task I want to perform. Somewhere, someone knows about what happened to my people. They know if the plague was accident or attack, error or experiment. Before Baramagna crumbles to dust, I am going to find those answers. And if someone caused this fate to befall my tribe, then I hope somewhere they are dreaming of me and waking up screaming. To be continued. Samad's Tale, Part 2. I like to sleep. I like to sleep because I like to dream. Dreaming reminds me that I'm still alive. Last night I dreamt I was back in the village of Iron, working in the cold and damp of the mines. The air was filled with the rhythmic ching-ching of picks striking stone. Spherus Magna was generous that day, and we emerged from the dark with loads of iron. I stood upon a peak and saw the Rockagori in the distance, scrambling to and fro like spider beetles. Then they stopped and turned as one to stare at our village. I turned to see what they might be looking at, and that was when I saw the first Iron Agori vanish. One moment he was unloading an ore cart, the next he was gone. In the next few moments more disappeared, and then more. I knew that something terrible was happening. I had to stop it. I ran through the village in search of the woman I loved. When I found her, I took her in my arms and held her tight, and an instant later my arms held only empty air. Help! We needed help. I rushed down the mountain toward the Rockagori. I shouted for them to aid us, but no one paid any attention. I screamed, I pleaded, to no avail. I moved to strike one of their villagers down just to get their attention, and then I looked down and saw nothing. I had disappeared. I woke up in a sweat. I had camped not far from the Scrawl River. I took off my armor and knelt on the bank, trying to wash away my nightmare. In the moonlight, I could see something massive in the distance. When I took a better look, I saw it was the Scopio vehicle Tellurus had built, now sprawled out on the sand like the carcass of a dead animal. The owner himself was crouched beside it. I hitched up the spigot to my wagon and rode to Tellurus. He seemed to be in mourning. "What happened?" I asked. "They ruined it," my tribesman answered. "The Glutorian. They sabotaged it. It won't work anymore." I always thought the Scopio was a gaudy waste of time and materials. No matter how big your weapon, someone else can always build a bigger one. You don't conquer your enemies with something they can see coming 10 miles away. You do it by working your way inside like the larva of a spiked worm, making yourself part of their society and then rotting them out from the inside. The Scopio was Tellurus's crutch, his way of throwing an armed and armored tantrum at the world. "You can't fix it?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't have the parts." I looked at him. In a couple of days, maybe, he would think to stop missing his machine and get out of the sun. By then, he would be in no condition to be of use to anyone. But unstable as he was still Iron Tribe, one of the few left. So I owed him. "Maybe we can find what you need," I offered. "I'm headed north. Come with me." Tellurus glanced up at me, then gestured to the dead Scopio. "I can't just leave it." "It's not going anywhere," I answered. "And when we come back, we'll rebuild it bigger and better than before." Tellurus got up and climbed in the wagon. I yanked on the reins, and the spigot started plodding north. I wasn't sure exactly where we were going, but I had an idea. If the death of my tribesman wasn't an accident, then it was murder. And if it was murder, someone had to benefit from it. Whoever that someone was, I was going to make them pay for every dead Iron Agori. I couldn't return to the scene of the crime because Boda Magna had split off 100,000 years ago and wasn't coming back. All I could do was go north and hope I'd learn something, preferably before the two robots slugging it out overhead wrecked what was left of Baramagna. We had been traveling for a few hours when the spigot suddenly reared up, both of its heads arching in panic. Tellurus jumped off the wagon. He pointed to something and shouted, but I'd already seen it myself. A long gray serpent was coiled in the sand up ahead. A serpent with blue eyes. And there was madness in those eyes. "Kill it," I said to Tellurus. My tribesman grabbed a blade from the wagon and advanced on the snake cautiously. It was some kind of a viper, poisonous to the extreme, and it was of no use alive. Dead, it would at least be dinner. Tellurus raised the weapon, and I was about to bring it down when the snake reared up as if it was going to strike. But instead of attacking, it spoke. "Go ahead," it said. "Kill me. I can't take this anymore." Dolores looked at me to see if he had gone crazy. I nodded to let him know I heard it too. I was reminded of some wild tale I'd heard from a few Rockagori. They were fleeing Roxas after losing a battle to the other villages, and claimed an Isagori named Matus had been turned into a snake. Sounded to me like they had been eating too many rotten thornax, but now, well, there are plenty of weird things in the Barra Magna Desert, but talking snakes isn't one of them. "You're Matus?" I asked the serpent. It hissed in response. "They said you were vowing revenge for what happened to you," I said. "Give up on that, did you?" "I still want revenge," Matus replied. "Being turned into this monster couldn't stop me. Making me an insect wouldn't stop me. I would still find a way somehow if it weren't for—" He stopped. I waited. When he didn't continue, I said, "Except for what?" The serpent slithered through the sound and looked up at me with pleading in its ice-blue eyes. "I've stopped dreaming," it whispered. Suddenly, the desert seemed to grow very quiet and still, and all I could hear was my own voice saying, "It's starting again." To be continued. Samad's Tale, Part 3. I was standing on the desert sands, having a conversation with a talking snake. The sad part is, that was the bright spot of sanity in my day, and right in the middle of our exchange, the world ended. At least that was how it felt to me. First a shadow passed over us. Tellers started babbling that the moon was falling from the sky. Matus buried his head under the sand. I looked up to see a massive celestial body passing overhead, a fragment of which slammed into the head of one of the two giant robots. The robot fell, and the impact knocked me off my feet. I made no effort to get up. If the world is coming to an end, might as well face it lying down. The second impact was, surprisingly, not as severe. After a few moments, when no more robots were falling or moons flying through the sky, I lifted my head. Tellurus was saying that Spherus Magna was whole again. He seemed excited about that. I didn't join in his celebration. You might wonder why I wasn't overjoyed to have the 3 segments of my planet one again. As anyone who's been on Barra Magna after dark can tell you, it gets very cold in the desert. I grew very cold over 100,000 years ago, and now all I could think of was that if the beings who unleashed the dreaming plague on my people were on Boda Magna, they were now within my reach again. I got to my feet and brushed the sand off my armor. It was time to leave. "Let's go," I said to my 2 allies. Tellurus wasn't listening. He was still caught up in the miraculous return of Aqua Magna and Boda Magna. But then that's why I have the whip. "You know what comes next," I said to both of my companions. "After the celebration is over, the Agori will start wanting to clean up the mess. Anyone who doesn't fit into their well-ordered little social structure will get shoved aside or trampled over. I don't intend to be either." Matus looked unsure of what to do. He had stopped dreaming some time ago. The sickness had him. Within weeks, maybe days, he would be a raving lunatic. But before then, I needed him. As he started to slither toward where the Agori and Glatorian stood, I brought an armored foot down on his body and pinned him to the sand. "Think about it," I said. "I heard all about you. You think they're going to welcome you back? You're an embarrassment to them at best. They let you off with your life last time. Show your face again and they'll make a pair of boots out of you." "What do you want of me?" the servant, who had once been an Agori, asked me. "I want to know everywhere you've been since you left Roxas and everything you've done. I want to retrace every inch you've crawled. Somewhere along that route is a clue to what happened to you and to my people, and we're going to find it." Immediately after the battle in Roxas, Matus had headed north into the mountains. Some of those mountains were gone now, reduced to pebbles by the battle between the 2 robots, but he said he wasn't until he had passed through them that his dreams ceased, so perhaps whatever I was looking for lay beyond. He showed us where he had camped, near a pool. Had he drunk from it? No. What had he eaten? Rodents, he said. Did they taste strange in any way? I asked. "They were rats," Matus snapped. "Of course they tasted strange." "There must be something here," I said, looking around here. "Something that infected you." "Maybe it's not something physical," said Taurus. "Maybe it's a curse or something. Anyway, no one from our tribe would have traveled this far from the village, so how can this spot be the cause?" "Perhaps whatever caused the plague moved on after its work was done," I answered. "Or maybe—" I stopped. I had spotted something not far away, mostly hidden under plant growth. It was a scar in the earth in the shape of a rough triangle, perhaps 3 feet wide at its base. I crouched down to see if there was a hole, but none could be seen, just the pattern carved into dirt and rock. Look around, I told the others. See if you can find another mark like this. We searched for an hour. There was no sign of any other triangle in the ground, nor any sign of who or what might have made this one. Was it a footprint, the track left by a mechanical device, or some natural phenomenon I simply had not seen before? I turned to ask Tellurus his opinion, since he had seen much in his travels in the Scopio, but he was gone. Matus insisted he had not seen where he went to. I followed my tribesmen's footprints in the soft earth until they stopped in the middle of an open patch of ground. The dirt had been disturbed here as if something had swept it clean. I heard a soft sound behind me. I turned to see a sickly red tentacle covered in spines slithering up from beneath the soil. Before I could speak, it had wrapped itself around Matus and dragged him down into the ground. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream as a second tentacle briefly appeared to brush the dirt back into a normal pattern before it, too, vanished underground. I aimed my Thornax launcher at the spot and fired. It blew a hole in the ground, sending a shower of earth and rock into the air. When the dust had cleared, I saw no trace of my 2 allies or their attacker. Whatever had taken them was gone. I was furious, frustrated, stymied at every turn. Just when I had found the first sign of an answer, it might be snatched away from me. At any moment, the tentacles might return. I had no way to reach Tellurus or Matus, and no hope of survival if I stayed. But if I left, I might never solve the mystery that plagued me. My people would go unavenged. I stood right on the spot where Matus had disappeared. "Come then," I shouted. "Attack! Drag me down! But before I die, creature, I'll know your truth." I was still standing there, as 3 tentacles groped blindly from the earth and wrapped themselves around me. There wasn't even time to yell, as the sky above me was replaced by earth and clay, as I was ripped from the realm of light and sent hurtling down to a world of shadows. To be continued. Samad's Tale, Chapter 4. I was dead. 3 grotesque tentacles had erupted from the ground, wrapped themselves around me, and dragged me down to my death. That was the only explanation. For if I wasn't dead, then I was mad, and I much preferred extinction to insanity. If you have been following this chronicle up to now, you know that I, Tellurus, and an intelligent Agori-turned-serpent named Matus had been searching for the cause of the dreaming plague that had wiped out the Iron Tribe ages ago. Our investigation had not gone well, considering that we evidently wound up a meal for a monster. But the world beyond death was not at all what I had expected. I was lying on a cot in a large room. There were perhaps 36 other cots, half of them filled with wounded or ill Agori. Now and again a water Agori would walk by, bringing food and drink to my companions. When she noticed my eyes were open, she dropped her tray and rushed over. "Samad, you're awake," she said, smiling. Agori do not smile at me. Sneer, yes. Curse, certainly. Even spit on occasion, but smile? Never. Hence my belief that if I was not dead, I was in an asylum of some sort. I tried to sit up. My body refused to cooperate. "Where am I?" I asked. "The healer's chamber," she answered. "We thought you would never awaken." "Let me rephrase my question," I said. "Where am I?" "Where?" A light dawned in her eyes. "Oh, of course you wouldn't know. This is the city of New Otero in Boda Magna. You were found in northern Barramagna, and they took care of you as well as they could down there, until things were ready here." Yes, she was mad. There was no New Otero, certainly not in Boda Magna, and if they had found me, they would have found my 2 companions, but I didn't see either of them here. Tellurus, Matus, they were traveling with me. Where are they? My deranged new friend looked uncomfortable. "We never found Tellurus. Matus survived for a few months. They even used the mask to turn him back into an Agori, but it didn't help. I'm sorry." "I'm surprised you bothered," I said. "The 3 of us were not exactly popular with the majority of Agori." "That was a long time ago." I recognized that voice. It was a little older, a little rougher, but it belonged to Kina, the Water Glatorian. Sure enough, there she was, her armor more battle-scarred and her left arm hanging useless at her side. "Really?" I said. "I didn't think there was a time limit on hatred." "A great deal changed after the fall of the Skrull," Kina answered. "You missed all of it. You've been asleep for 750 years, Samad." There was a moment then, just a moment, mind you, when I felt rattled. I mean, it could have been true. The monster might have chewed us up and spat us out. Someone might have found Matus and I and kept us alive. All Agori and Glatorian might be living as brothers and sisters in a beautiful new city, ready to welcome even survivors of the Iron Tribe into their arms. And Thornax fruit might taste like boiled Scopio meat, and the great beings might be handing out gift baskets of implants, but I wasn't ready to believe that either. I pushed myself up off the cot, ignoring my body's protests. The Agori handed me a stick I could use to support myself. She tried to talk me out of leaving the chamber. I told her I had places to go. Outside, the city was as busy as a nest of dune spiders. Agori and Glatorian ran here and there, interacting with other beings, large and small. The strangers seemed more machine-like somehow, yet at the same time their movements were too fluid and graceful to be purely mechanical. My first thought was that they would make good slaves. I guess old habits die hard. It all looked, sounded, and felt real, but I knew it wasn't. If I hadn't been sure before, Kina's appearance had clinched it. I don't care how much time had passed, she would never appear at my bedside except to stab me. And 750 years was not enough to wipe out over 100 millennia of suspicion, fear, and disgust. Someone wanted me to think this was a brand new world, but in my heart I knew it was the same old one. Worse even, before there had been someone to fight. Who did you battle when the enemy was determined to stay hidden? As I looked around at everyone laboring together for the greater good, I kept thinking, whose dream is this? It certainly wasn't mine. My people were dead. They couldn't enjoy all this peace and good feeling, and if they couldn't benefit from it, I didn't want to either. I would just as soon have seen new Atero go the way of old Atero. I was pondering ways to make that happen when I spotted a flash of familiar armor. The metal bore the colors of latter-day Iron Tribe post-plague. Okay, I admit it. Now I was intrigued. Was this supposed to be some survivor who made his or her way to the city and found acceptance? If there was one in this fantasy, could there be more? I wondered, what if there was a grain of truth to all of this? What if any Iron Tribe member who showed up in this illusion really was alive somewhere? Was that the point of all this, to point me in the direction of other survivors? I started to run, pushing my way past Agori and their mechanical helpers. I rounded the corner and wound up in the middle of a market. Tables were piled high with armor, food, cloth, pieces of art. I spotted my quarry at the far end of the square, turning into a side street. I kept moving, knocking over display stands and provoking angry exclamations all around. Akar, a fire Glatorian, tried to stop me, but he was too old and too slow. I took the corner at top speed and skidded to a halt in the soft earth. An Iron Tribe member was standing in the center of the street, aiming a Thornax launcher right at my head. But this wasn't just any of my brethren. This was the woman I loved, who died from the dreaming plague more than 100,000 years ago. I started to say her name. She fired her weapon. The Thornax sped toward me. I felt an impact against my helmet, saw a flash of light, heard the dull roar of an explosion, and then I was dead. Again. Darkness became light. I was back in the healer's chamber. This time there was no water Agori, no Kina, no Agori of other tribes and cots. All I saw were iron Agori. The attendants stopped to stare at me. The patients sat up on their beds, and they all spoke at once in the same voice. "We thought you would be stronger, Samad, but you were just as weak as Talaris, Matus, and all the rest. Still, we can take some comfort. Weak souls taste lovely, after all." To be continued. Samad's Tale, Part 5. There are some days when you feel like every weapon in the world is loaded and aimed at you. There are some days when you know that even your best friend, if you had one, would be pointing you out to a Scopio as a possible meal. I was having one of those kind of days. Let me explain. I was sitting in an illusory healing tent, facing a bunch of Agori who weren't really there, yet were all talking in the same voice. And they weren't sending warm greetings. No, they were talking about Well, let's just say they were good at making threats and leave it at that. Was I afraid? Sure. But just like you can take a thorn-axe fruit and turn it into a weapon, you can take fear and turn it into anger. Fear is a rock you can hide under. Anger is a rock you can throw at someone else. Are you going to show yourself, I asked my unseen host, or just keep talking through your made-up agori? Laughter filled the room. It sounded like crystal being shattered and then ground into dust. You think the beings you see before you are the products of my imagination? My captor asked. Then look again. The agori were shimmering, fading, and in their place stood Sisters of the Scrawl, maybe a dozen. I began to regret my question. I knew what the sisters could do to your brain. But there's an old saying, you don't get across the Scrawl River by just dipping in your toe. So the sisters work for you. Are they responsible for what happened to the Iron Agori, the dreaming plague? There was that laughter again. I was starting to hate that sound. The sisters are silly little fools, came the answer. They actually believe a great being visited power upon them. It was I that gifted them with the psionic powers they wield. I thought it would be amusing to see them destroy the males of their species. But like you, they were too weak and allowed themselves to be driven out. They didn't have the will to conquer, and now they have no will at all. And was that what the plague was, just another one of your experiments? I demanded. The mouths of every sister opened, and the same answer came from them all. Experiment? Oh, no. That was lunch. The Sisters of the Scrawl dropped to the ground then, as if their legs could suddenly no longer support them. A pinpoint of light appeared near the far wall and rapidly grew larger and larger. My host was making its appearance. I was about to confront the being that wiped out my tribe. Imagine staring directly into the sun, and the reddish streaks burned into your eyes, taking the shape of things too hideous to describe. Even when you close your eyes, look away, it makes no difference. You know you've seen something you can never erase from your memory. Would you be fortunate to stay sane, or would that be the worst possible luck? I hungered, said a voice from the center of the sphere of light, and when I hunger, I feed. The dreams of your people were a very satisfying meal, enough so that I did not need nourishment again for many years. Of course, once I was done, your people had no dreams left, but they, like the dreams themselves, were hardly to be missed. I needed a weapon. I needed something to blow out this malevolent sun that was still expanding. It filled the room with light, but no heat, just a bone-chilling cold that made the desert night seem tropical. But I had no weapon. Anger, defiance, stubbornness, a willingness to die to avenge my people, those I had in abundance. They would have to do. Nice light show, I said. Pretty fancy for something the great beings made and threw away. That is what you are, isn't it? Another one of their projects gone wrong? The light flared brighter. Crimson tentacles erupted from the glowing sphere. I barely avoided their grasp. I existed before your great beings were born, said the creature. I sensed their coming and wondered if they might pose some threat to me. I even tried to touch them with madness, but their minds were too strange. Their minds fed on mine. They took the dreams from me, and that energy inspired them to greater and greater feats of creation, and I was forced to hide in the depths of Spherus Magna. Hide and wait, I thought, and while waiting it got hungry, and the Agori paid the price. I heard noises behind me. I glanced over my shoulder to see Matus and Tellurus rushing in. Or was it them? Last time I had seen Matus, he was a snake. Now he was walking on two legs like any other Agori, and there was nothing serpentine about him. Dreams, said the creature whose brightness filled the room now. Is he a snake who dreams he is an Agori, or an Agori who dreams he is a snake? Come on, said Tellurus, we have to get out of here. I admit it. I hesitated. I wasn't sure if my two allies were real or more figments of imagination. By the time I made a decision, the Sisters of the Scrawl were back on their feet and heading for us. We ran then, one fellow tribe member and one Agori who shouldn't have been able to run. We ran through tunnels that stretched for miles, ran until we saw the light from the surface shining up ahead. Tellurus let out a whoop, and we forced ourselves to keep going. On the surface, in the sunlight, everything would be all right. We would leave our fears behind us in the dark and then find a way to banish their source forever. All we had to do was make it to the light. And we did. We climbed and clawed our way back to the surface, back to the bright Spherus Magna morning. For now, we were safe. Only it wasn't morning. It was the middle of the night, and the light we had seen, the light we had run to past all endurance, was not the light of the sun. It was the thing, the creature we had tried so hard to escape. It was on the surface. It was free of whatever had forced it to hide below ground for so long, and somehow I knew it was hungry. To be continued. Samad's Tale, Chapter 6. A long time ago, I stumbled on a nest of desert leeches. If you've never seen one, they're disgusting little things. They nest on the ceilings of caves, and that's where their young hatch. The babies cling to the roof, waiting for someone to pass underneath. Then they rain down on you, attaching themselves to any exposed flesh and feeding on your life energy. When you find yourself under a nest, the first thing you feel is anger. How could I be so stupid as to walk into a cave and not look up? And then the horror hits you, dragging your guts down to the ground, turning your arms and legs to water, making your spirit clench like a fist. It's the worst feeling you can imagine, and it's how I was feeling right now as I watched the thing that had wiped out my people manifesting itself on the surface of Spherus Magna. It was bellowing its triumph in my head. I could hear it shout its name, Annona, as it exulted in being free after so many years underground. It had only stayed hidden out of fear of the great beings, and last time I checked, no great beings were around. This wasn't good news. I looked at my two companions. Tellurus was never a picture of sanity to begin with, and this experience was close to rendering him catatonic. Matus was a greedy, backstabbing crook who had been turned into a snake by this Motunui guy with a magic sword or some such thing. Now he was back walking on two legs, not sure how. "What are we standing here for?" he was saying. "We need to run away." I shook my head. "Run where? Do you really think there's anywhere this thing couldn't follow? All we would do is wear ourselves out and make things easier for it." "I'll get my Scopio," Tellurus babbled, referring to the war machine he built from scraps a while back. "That will save us." "Your Scopio is a pile of junk," I snapped. Not that it wasn't much more than that when it was intact. No, we're going to need more than that to stop something that turns snakes back into Agori. Matus looked at me like I was crazy. "Annona didn't do that. What are you, nuts?" Motunui never intended that snake thing to be permanent, I guess, or maybe something happened to him, I don't know. All of a sudden I was back to being myself again, although granted I still have a real craving for rodents. Through all this, Annona's radiance kept getting bigger and brighter. It looked like a star, a red star, although I can't recall seeing a star with tentacles before. It was scouting, I guess is the best word for it. It fed on dreams. It would seek out a community and take that dream energy from them, driving them all mad in the process, and I had no idea how to stop it. Maybe it couldn't be stopped. I felt it pause. It had sensed a feast waiting for it. Where? Would it be back in the desert where the Baramagna Agori were assembled, or in some village in Bodamagna? Could its reach extend even to other worlds? All I knew was that someone was on the menu and they had to be warned, or they would end up like the Iron Tribe. Annona flared brightly. It was getting ready to leave, heading for its next meal. I started to run. "Come on," I yelled. "It's not going without us." "You are crazy," said Matus. "I'm not going anywhere near that thing." "Tellurus, get moving," I answered. "This thing, it's going after your Scopio. You need to stop it." That was enough to get Tellurus moving, but Matus was rooted to the spot. "Stay," I told him. "You're only in the middle of nowhere, unarmed, with no idea how to get home and no home to go to. Why should you come with us? After all, you have so much to lose." Matus cursed and started running toward us. Together we leapt into Annona's radiant sphere, even as it blinked out of existence. The next thing I knew, I was drowning. By sheer instinct, I kicked toward what I hoped was the surface. My head broke the water and I gasped for air. When I had my breath again, I looked around, stunned. I was in Aqua Magna. Matus and Tellurus were nearby, gasping and choking. In front of us, about 50 yards away, was a stretch of beach, and beyond that, rocky cliffs. Perched atop one of the cliffs was a fortress, gleaming in the moonlight, bristling with defenses and looking impregnable. And there was Annona, slowly rising toward that fortress. I didn't know whose fortress it was or who lived in it. I only knew they were all dead if Annona reached it. The three of us swam for the beach and started scrambling up the cliffs. Annona hadn't noticed us, or if he had, simply didn't care. But I knew we would never reach the top before it did. Our fight was over before it started. Sure enough, Annona vanished from view well before we made it to the top of the cliff. particularly given what a poor climber Matus turned out to be. The sight we saw when we reached the fortress was something out of a nightmare. Weird warriors, heavily armed, powerful, with what looked like grins plastered on their faces, were busy battling empty air. Annona had diverted them with illusions, just as it had us. Now it would conceal itself and feed until these warriors and anyone else here were dead. The radiance moved toward the vast doors of the fortress. Nothing stood in its way. Nothing, that is, until the doors burst open from the inside, and something stepped out into the night. The newcomer was 12 feet tall, with golden skin and rippling muscles. Its eyes and face were vaguely reptilian, and it looked at Annona through the narrow slits of those eyes. "I have come to feed," said Annona. "Surrender." The golden being smiled. "You feed on dreams, and we would not exist without them. They are food for you, but we take them and make them real. And in so doing we conquer and enslave. And thus it would appear you are destined to go hungry this night." Annona flared brighter, its radiance blinding. I couldn't see any more, only hear its voice and that of its new opponent. "And who will deny me my feast?" asked Annona. "You, a pitiful amalgam of lesser races, bandits, thieves, and, yes, one thought dead. An experiment in desperation. You would stand against me?" I don't know for certain what happened next. I heard a sound like the sky had ripped open. The ground shook violently beneath me, and then I heard Annona screaming, and one thing more. The golden being said simply, "Yes, creature, I would stand against you." To be concluded. Samad's Tale, Chapter 7. I came to the shores of Aqua Magna once in my life, back when I had a life, and a tribe, friends, and a love. I was there to scout a trade route. Coming from the mountains, I had never seen so much water before. Even though the shoreline was rocky and desolate, it still looked like the most amazing, and in some ways terrifying, thing I had ever seen. Since then, I have seen my people wiped out, my planet shattered, and 1,000 other things that would make most people's nightmares look like idle daydreams. But I had never seen anything quite like what I was seeing now. Annona, all crimson fiery brilliance of it, was in agony. Spears of rock had suddenly erupted from the ground and pierced the energy being, and had writhed in pain. How mere rock could affect someone so powerful I didn't know, but it might have had something to do with who it was fighting. The golden being didn't have a name, at least not one I knew, but I had learned a great deal about him in the last few moments as he watched his enemy fading. He was made from other beings, species whose names I had never heard before, kept referring to himself as we and us, which was kind of creepy, but his argument with Annona was easy to see. "The dreams of my people give me life," said the golden being, "and in return I make their dreams real. And they dream of your death, Annona." "I know all this," Annona replied. "Why do you think I sought you out, creature? Dreams are my meat and drink. With them I am power. Without them I am nothing." The golden being shrugged and turned away. His followers, warriors who had been fighting empty images conjured up by Annona, followed. Evidently Annona was too busy dying to be able to keep his illusions up. "It makes little difference to me what you are," said the golden being dismissively, "as long as you are dead." For just a moment I felt satisfaction. The creature that had destroyed my tribe was going to die, and if it wasn't by my hand, it still felt like justice had been done. I should have known better. All around the golden being, his warriors began to collapse. Some sank to their knees, some babbling insanely, others drew their weapons and started advancing on their leader. Taken off guard, I guess the golden being's power weakened. Annona wrenched himself free of the spikes, a peal of laughter coming from its core. "I have always preferred to eat my meals slowly," it said. "I have never before tried consuming all the latent dream energy in beings all at once, but I see the result is the same: madness. Now, my friend, I believe the topic at hand was imminent death?" The golden being actually looked scared. I didn't like that at all. Behind him his fortress was starting to waver and blur. Worse, there were things appearing in the windows, others slithering or crawling across the landscape. "You imbecile," the golden being cried. "You don't understand. I bring dreams to life, even the dreams of the mad. Do you realize what that means?" I did. All of a sudden, it was like going for a walk through the head of my pal Taurus. The ground was buckling, the fortress was melting, and as for the warriors, I don't get sick easily, but the dreams of the deranged are pretty horrible things. Anona was glowing brighter. I doubted it ever had so much energy inside it at once. As if it wasn't dangerous enough before, it looked about ready to incinerate anyone who got too close. I wanted to run back to the ocean and swim across the planet, but I knew there was no place on this world that was safe. A few of the warriors reacted to Anona's approach by raising their weapons and charging. It was the last bad decision of their lives. The fortress was completely gone now. The horizon was full of gibbering things, some practically formless, some with forms you could still see even when you closed your eyes. The golden being was retreating back toward them, but he was off balance and rattled. It was going to be over in a matter of minutes. That's when Dolores broke. He vaulted out of our hiding place, screaming, waving a branch he had picked up from the beach. He headed right for Anona. If this were a tail, Matus or I would have risked our lives to try to stop him. But it's not a tail. Not that kind, anyway. And neither one of us was going to die for Dolores. He wasn't worth it. I'm not sure anyone is. I'll give him credit. He got within striking distance of Anona, but that was all he got. He died in mid-scream. It was a stupid, reckless, idiotic way to go, and I was about to repeat it, but I didn't plan on dying today. Then again, there's an old saying, if you want to make the great beings laugh, tell them your plans. I was banking on the golden being having the power to take out Anona if he got the chance to use it. That meant getting my enemy off his back for a few moments. I thought I saw a way to do that. The only things the golden being had created that were still intact were those rock spikes. I didn't know why they had been able to hurt Anona. Maybe someone dreamt they could, but they had. They were about to hurt him again. Come on, I said to Matus, we need to break off one of those spikes. Are you crazy? He predictably answered. I'm not going out there. I put a firm hand on his shoulder. Do you remember when you were a snake? I asked. Remember how that felt? Sure, said Matus. Well, I can make you feel a lot worse, and I don't need a magic sword to do it, I growled. Now come on. Together we made a run for it, dodging crazed warriors and hoping Anona was too drunk with power to notice us. We made it to the nest of spikes all right, but then cheerful old Matus pointed out a little problem. They're solid rock, he said. What are we supposed to use to break them? I was tempted to suggest that we use his head. Instead, I noticed one of the spikes had been weakened when Anona wrestled itself free. With Matus's help, I snapped it off. It wasn't a very long weapon, but the pointy end was intact, and that was all I cared about. You stay here, I told Matus. If I fail, try to break off another piece and try yourself. What am I saying? You're going to run as soon as my back is turned. All right, if I die, don't tell anyone how. I don't want people thinking I was quite this insane and idiotic in my final moments. I hefted the spike, and I ran. As I got closer to Anona, I realized I had to close my eyes or be blinded, so I did. As soon as the heat became unbearable, I knew I was as close as I dared get. I reared back and threw the spike as hard as I could. I heard a sizzle. Then I heard a scream. You know, a scream can be a delightful sound if the right person is doing it. I stumbled backwards until I couldn't feel the heat anymore. I took a chance and opened one eye. Anona had stopped moving forward. The rock spike was buried near one of its energy tentacles, joined its main body. It was positioned just right so that its tentacle couldn't reach to pull it out. It wasn't a fatal blow, far from it, but it had slowed him down. That was when I saw the golden being. He was looking right at me. Somehow I could hear what he was saying even from so far away. Then I knew what I had to do. Both of those powerful entities thrived on dreams. Anona fed off the kind you have at night, good or bad. The golden being took the ones you had in your heart, or the darkest parts of your soul, the aspirations, hopes, wishes, and made them real. There were 100 ways he could attack Anona, but only one that would really hurt. I closed my eyes again. I dreamed a dream. And in my dream, no one on Spherus Maga, no one in any world, anywhere near, could dream or wish or hope. I dreamed that there were no more dreams. I opened my eyes again, and I felt it, the emptiness, the void left behind when dreaming stops. This was how my tribe had felt just before they died. But this time the energy had not gone into Anona. It had not gone anywhere. It had just ceased to be. The golden being had made the last dream real. I saw him falter. I saw Anona flare up. Suddenly it knew that even if it won today, there would be no more meals. It would be trapped on Spheres Magna as its inhabitants went mad and died, but it would starve long before the last Agori perished. I expected Anona to rage and scream. Instead, it just hovered in the air and spoke directly to the golden being. "You did this," it said. "Why?" "Perhaps because monsters belong in dreams rather than dreams in monsters," the golden being replied. "Or perhaps I just want you dead." There was a long silence. Then Anona said, "A deal." "What sort of deal?" "A dream of another world filled with other beings where I can live and feed. Your empire will be safe, and I will be sated." The golden being pondered the offer for a while and then said, "Agreed." I started to protest, and then something made me stop. I realized that I could have dreamed Anona out of existence before, but didn't. Maybe because somehow I knew it wouldn't work. If the golden being could have eliminated Anona that easily, he would have done so. Yet here was a second chance to do the job, and do it with some style. "Samad will dream the dream," the golden being said. "No," Anona answered, "I do not agree." "I have given my word to you," the golden being said. "Samad will not dare to violate that." He was right. I had no need to violate it. I was going to give Anona just what he asked for. I closed my eyes. I imagined a lush green world, a paradise. I imagined Anona there free to feed to its heart's content. And I imagined a population for it to feed off of, each and every one of them a being just like Anona. They would feed off each other, and within a year not one would be left. I opened my eyes and looked at Anona as it faded away. "Got you," I said. When he was gone, the golden being approached me. "You could have dreamed me out of existence as well. I am surprised you did not." I looked him up and down. He was a weird one, and probably too clever by half. But for right now, "You're not my problem," I said. "That thing was, and now it's not. So we go our separate ways." "For now," the golden being said, "after you give the world back the gift of dreaming." "And give you back your power," I said. "All right, done." "You will hear from me again, you know," the golden being said. "I will not be content to stay on this spit of land forever." "Let me know when you and your army are coming," I answered. "Maybe I'll join up." I could have had him make me a boat, but I decided to walk. Anona was as good as dead, and there was a lot going on in Baramagna worth seeing these days. Not that I would be welcome to be a part of it. Matus either, wherever he had run off to. But that was all right. If I was right, they were going to have more trouble than they knew how to handle pretty soon, and I'd enjoy watching their misery. As for me, I was heading north to the mountains. There were people I lost a long time ago that I could finally say goodbye to. After that, well, that will be another tale entirely. The end.